When I was 28, I was in my second year teaching third grade at the elementary school down the street. My place was a one-story brick house, small yard, chain-link fence, pretty much the most boring spot you can imagine. Halloween was always a thing for me since I moved in, mostly because I didn't like the idea of kids walking blocks to strangers' houses for candy. I figured since I was right there, across from the main entrance, I'd make it easy for them. Every year I tried to do it up a little, but that year I went bigger than usual. I bought 3 big bags of full-size chocolate bars, not the mini ones. There were orange lights on the porch, fake cobwebs, a couple of plastic pumpkins, and I even stuck up a sign saying, "Mrs. Avery's Haunted Porch, don't be scared." It was a Wednesday, I remember, because the next day was a school day, and I had already warned my class I'd expect them bright and early, no matter how much candy they ate. The kids started showing up a little after 6, all dressed up. Vampires, princesses, Star Wars, and way too many Spider-Mans. Parents stood by the curb, coffee in hand. The air was chilly but not freezing, and my neighbor's floodlight kept my yard lit up. I had music going from a little speaker and a folding table with the candy bowls. I handed out chocolate bars, sometimes 2 if they looked especially excited, or if I recognized them from school. Some parents asked to take pictures, and I posed with their kids in front of my wobbly fake gravestone that kept falling over whenever anyone bumped it. By 9, most of the little kids were gone, and it was just older ones, teenagers in half-hearted costumes or hoodies. I let them take a handful each. They were loud but not too bad, just messing around. One kid threw a candy wrapper into my bushes and his friend told him off. The parents all disappeared by then. By 10:30, I figured that was it. The last group was 3 teenagers who barely said thanks, but I didn't care. I still had 3 bowls of candy left. I sat on the porch steps, scrolling my phone, looking at all the pictures from the night. Eventually, I brought the candy in and turned off the porch light, left the cobwebs and decorations up because I wasn't about to take them down that late. My street was dead quiet by then, just a few porch lights still on and someone's TV flickering blue through their window. I made tea, put on sweatpants, and decided to play a video game before bed. The living room was still kind of messy, candy wrappers on the coffee table, my work bag by the door. I had 1 lamp on, the rest of the house dark except for the game screen. After a while, I got pulled into it and stopped noticing the clock. It was almost midnight when I heard the first knock. It was a slow, single knock. I paused the game, listened, then figured maybe it was the wind rattling the screen door. But a few seconds later it came again. 3 knocks this time, more definite. I checked the time and thought, who the hell is trick-or-treating now? I stood up, looked through the peephole. Nobody was on the porch. I flicked on the outside light and stepped out. My street was empty, the leaves on the sidewalk barely moving. No cars going by, just the streetlight at the corner buzzing. I figured it was just some high schoolers pulling a prank, knock and run, nothing new. I went back in and locked the door, but left the porch light on, just in case someone had forgotten their phone or something and came back. 10 minutes passed. I started to relax, went back to the game, half watching the window out of habit. That's when the knocking came again, this time louder and faster, maybe 6 or 7 times. I paused the game and walked straight to the door. I didn't open it right away, just looked through the peephole again. Still nobody. I opened the door a crack and checked the porch. This time, something was sitting right in the middle of the doormat. A small trick-or-treat bag, cheap purple plastic, little pumpkins printed on the side. There was nothing else on the porch, not even a shadow moving. I leaned out and looked down the sidewalk both ways, but didn't see anyone running or hiding. I picked up the bag and peered inside. It was empty, except for a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was messy. Big letters, black marker. It just said, "Trick or treat." No name, no address, nothing else. I got annoyed. I figured someone was trying to be funny, maybe one of my older students or some neighbor kid. I didn't have time for games with work in the morning. I tossed the bag and note out onto the sidewalk, not wanting to deal with it, and locked the door this time for real, flipping the deadbolt. I shut off the porch light, pulled the curtain closed, and went to the kitchen for water. I was halfway back to the living room when I heard a rustle outside the window, like feet scuffing on the concrete. My heart jumped a little, but I told myself it was probably a cat, or maybe the wind blowing the bag around. I sat down on the couch, still holding my glass, and tried to get back into the game. But I couldn't help glancing at the window every few seconds, the TV light making it hard to see out. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Someone was right outside the window, holding up the same purple trick-or-treat bag, peering in through the glass at me. The person was just standing there waving the bag back and forth like they wanted me to see it. I couldn't make out their face in the darkness, but they looked like an adult, not a kid. Their clothes were dark, baggy, and the way they moved made it clear this wasn't just some teenager goofing off. I opened the window and told them to stop messing around and go home. My voice sounded louder than I meant it to, echoing down the empty street. They just kept waving the bag, slower now, like they were taunting me, like they knew I wouldn't do anything. I felt my hands shaking. I threatened to call the police, and they still didn't move. There was a long pause, their silhouette barely shifting in the yellow streetlight, and then they took a step closer to the glass. My skin crawled. I said I was coming out there with a baseball bat and they better be gone by the time I got outside. Still nothing. No reaction. Just that slow, side-to-side motion of the bag. I grabbed my Louisville Slugger from the closet, the same one I used to take to the batting cages, and headed for the front door. I was so focused on the person at the window that I didn't bother looking down. When I stepped onto the porch, I immediately slipped on something wet and sticky. It happened fast. My foot skidded on the top step, and my knee buckled. I fell hard on my back, the bat bouncing out of my hand and clattering against the porch railing. The wet stuff smelled sharp, chemical, not just rainwater or soda. I put my hand down to try and get up and saw the red streaks across my palm. It was paint, thick and sticky, smeared across the top 2 steps and pooling by the edge. Before I could get up, the person in dark clothes doused that trick-or-treat bag with something from a bottle they pulled out of their pocket. It smelled like gasoline, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I froze for a second, realizing what was happening. They lit a match, and in the flare of orange light, I caught a glimpse of their face. Just a jaw, maybe stubble, but no details. They lit the bag and threw it right at me while I was still on the ground. It landed on my left arm, and flames shot up fast, licking my sleeve and the edge of my hair. I panicked, rolled off the side of the steps into the flower bed, rubbing dirt all over my arm to smother the fire. The dirt stuck to the paint, clumping, but the flames went out. My sleeve was burned through, the skin underneath red and raw, but not the worst I'd seen. My hands shook as I scrambled to my feet, but when I looked up, whoever it was had disappeared completely. There were no footsteps, no sounds of running. It was like they'd never been there at all, except for the smell of gasoline and the mess on my porch. That's when I noticed the dead cat lying next to my front door. It was one of the neighborhood strays, and someone had written, "Pay for treats," in red paint across my door, the words dripping down the wood. My chest felt hollow. This wasn't a prank. It was personal, but I had no idea who would do something like this or why. I went back inside, locking every bolt, and called the police. I could barely hold the phone steady. They took a report and told me to clean up and stay inside. The officer who showed up was tired, said there wasn't much they could do without witnesses or security footage. He checked the yard, took a few photos, asked if I'd argued with anyone or had trouble with a parent at school. I hadn't. He said it was probably someone with mental health issues who got triggered by Halloween celebrations, that it wasn't the first time he'd seen something like this. He gave me a card and told me to call if anything else happened, but his eyes said he didn't expect to find anyone. I spent the rest of the night cleaning paint off my porch and throwing away my burned shirt. It took hours to scrub the paint from the steps and the door, but some stains wouldn't come off no matter what I used. I left the dead cat in a box for animal control. I barely slept, just sat up on the couch, lights on, waiting for something else. The next day, I found out that 2 other houses in the neighborhood had similar incidents, both homes where people were giving out candy. One neighbor had a pumpkin smashed and red paint thrown over their front door. The other had all their decorations stolen and a bag of garbage left in their mailbox. None of us saw who did it. The police drove by a few more times that week, but nothing else happened. I never did Halloween decorations again after that year. I didn't even buy candy. Sometimes trying to bring joy to your community just makes you a target for people who want to destroy that joy. I learned that not everyone appreciates the simple traditions that make neighborhoods feel safe. Some people want to break things just to prove they can, and you can't stop them by being nice or making your house fun for kids. Now, every Halloween, I keep my porch lights off and pretend I'm not home. I still look out the window, though, every year, just to be sure no one's out there waving a bag at me in the dark. When I was 14, my brother Michael and I used to spend most evenings at the school field behind our house in Atlanta, just kicking a ball around. It was late September, and the weather was still warm enough to wear shorts, but the sun set early. Michael was 15, taller than me, and always way better at soccer, but he never acted like he minded helping me practice. He'd show me how to keep the ball close to my feet, how to line up a shot, and he'd get on my case if I slacked off, but not in a mean way. That day, we'd eaten dinner fast and ran out to the field before it got dark, carrying a single half-inflated soccer ball and Michael's worn-out duffel with a couple of cones inside. The field was nothing fancy, just patchy grass, one net with holes, and a metal fence along the side that faced the road. Cars went by every few minutes, sometimes people walking dogs or biking past on the sidewalk. We were out there for almost an hour, running drills, arguing about the score, sometimes just booting the ball back and forth in the dimming light. There were lights on the tennis courts, but nobody ever turned on the field lights unless there was an official practice, so it got darker, the sky turning purple and bugs coming out. I'd just finished trying to beat Michael in a sprint when I noticed a man standing by the fence, about 20 yards down, right next to the sidewalk. He had a dark jacket, jeans, and one of those baseball caps pulled low. He wasn't moving, just standing with his hands in his pockets, watching us. I thought maybe he was waiting for someone, or just passing the time, because people in our neighborhood would sometimes stop and watch if there was a game on, or if their kid was out practicing. I pointed him out to Michael. He shrugged and said, "Probably some dad waiting for his kid." We went back to playing, but every time I glanced over, the guy was still there, not looking at his phone or doing anything, just watching. Sometimes he'd move his head like he was following the ball, but mostly he just stared at us. The air felt sticky, the kind of humid that makes your shirt cling, and the sweat started drying on my arms, giving me goosebumps. A few more cars went by. A couple of them slowed down near the intersection but kept going. Michael called out that we should pack it in soon because it was getting too dark to see the ball right, and our mom would yell if we came home late again. I agreed, but I kept glancing at the guy by the fence, trying not to look like I was staring. He hadn't moved a step, and I started to notice that he wasn't carrying anything. No gym bag, not even a water bottle. Just standing, hands in his jacket pockets. We kept playing, trying to ignore him. Michael said maybe he was a scout or a coach from one of the local teams, checking out kids for tryouts. That made me laugh because we were just messing around, not running drills or anything. But even after we stopped running and started picking up the cones and our water bottles, the man was still standing there, right in the same spot. It was like he was waiting for us. We zipped up the duffel and started heading off the field toward the sidewalk, which meant walking in the same direction as the man by the fence. Michael kept his eyes on him, and I tried not to. My shoes made squishing sounds in the damp grass. I looked up and realized the streetlights were on now, and everything outside the glow looked blurry. The man didn't walk away when we got closer. Instead, as we neared the corner of the field, he turned and started walking in the same direction we were going, just outside the fence. I nudged Michael. He whispered, "Let's take the long way through Riverside Park." The park ran behind the school, looping around toward our neighborhood, and had paths shaded by big trees. I said sure, not really wanting to admit I felt nervous. So, we took the shortcut across the field, away from the main road, and headed toward the park entrance, a little gap in the fence. I could hear our footsteps on the loose gravel as we walked faster. When we turned into the park, I checked over my shoulder. The man had changed direction too, following us along the sidewalk, still outside the fence but keeping pace. He was about 50 yards behind, his head down, just a dark shape moving steady and slow. Michael muttered, "Walk faster." So we sped up, our sneakers slapping against the cracked path. The trees in the park made everything darker, even with a few lamps on. I could hear bugs chirping, and somewhere a dog barked. We passed the empty playground, the swings moving slightly in the breeze, and started cutting through the path that would take us closer to the river and away from the main streets. The man was still following. Every time we glanced back, he was there, never gaining, never dropping behind, just always the same distance, matching our speed. Michael didn't say anything else, just clenched his jaw and kept walking faster. My heart thudded heavy in my chest as we reached the next curve in the path, and I heard the man's footsteps on the gravel behind us, steady, never slowing down. By the time we reached our street, I was really scared, and Michael was trying to act calm, but I could tell he was worried too. We lived on Maple Avenue in a blue house with a white fence, and our parents wouldn't be home from work until 9. There was no one else around, just the glow from the streetlight and the sound of crickets. Michael held my arm and told me not to look back, but I couldn't help it. The man was still there, just standing at the end of the street under the trees. My hands shook as I dug for the house key in my backpack, dropping it twice on the steps. Michael snapped at me to hurry up, and I finally got the door open. We rushed inside and locked the door immediately, then checked the deadbolt and slid the chain across. I ran into the living room and turned off all the lights except the porch, trying to see through the window without being seen. The man hadn't left. Now he was standing closer, right by our mailbox, leaning against it like he belonged there. He had his phone pressed to his ear, but didn't seem to be talking, just watching our house. He glanced up at the windows every few seconds. Michael whispered for me to move away from the glass, but I stayed, peeking through the edge of the curtain. The man didn't move, didn't even look at the cars passing by. I saw his lips moving, maybe talking to someone, but I couldn't hear anything. Michael grabbed his phone and went into the hallway, his voice low as he called 911. I heard him tell the dispatcher our address and what was happening, giving a quick description of the guy. I turned on all the outside lights, porch, driveway, backyard, then ran to the panel to arm the home security system. just like Mom had shown us 100 times. I checked the locks on the back door in the garage, my hands sweaty and shaking. The dispatcher said they were sending a patrol car and told us to stay inside with the doors locked. Michael put the phone on speaker so we could both hear her voice. I stayed by the front window, heart pounding every time the man glanced up at our house. He started pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, still talking on his phone. At one point, a neighbor walked by with a dog. The man stopped moving but didn't look at the dog or the neighbor, just kept staring up at the window. The neighbor didn't seem to notice anything strange and just kept walking. We waited, barely breathing, listening for the sirens. It felt like forever, but maybe it was 5 minutes. Suddenly the man glanced down the street, saw the flashing lights coming, and hurried away. He crossed the road and disappeared into the alley between two houses. I kept watching, but he didn't come out the other side. 2 police cars pulled up in front of our house, lights bouncing off the windows. Officers came to the door, and Michael let them in. We told them what happened and pointed toward the alley, but when they searched the neighborhood, they couldn't find anyone matching the description. They walked around for a while, checked the side yards and driveways, and asked if we'd ever seen the man before. We said no. The officers said they would increase patrols in the area for the next few weeks and told us to call again if we saw anything. Our parents came home while the police were still there. Mom was really shaken up, and Dad kept asking questions, trying to stay calm. The officers spoke with them, reassured us they would keep an eye out. After they left, Dad made sure every lock was double-checked, and Mom hugged us tight. That night, none of us slept much. Every little noise made me jump. Michael stayed up late in his room, texting our friends to warn them. The next day, Dad called the school to tell them what happened. He found out that 3 other families had reported similar incidents in the past week. Someone had seen a man matching the same description following teenagers home from the sports fields. The principal sent out an email to all the parents, warning them to pick up their kids and not let anyone walk home alone. For 2 weeks, police cruisers drove up and down Maple Avenue every night. I watched from the window every evening, expecting to see the man come back. I never saw him again. Then one afternoon, the police came to our house and told us they'd caught the guy. He'd tried to follow a girl home from the high school, but her dad saw him and called the police. They found him living out of his car, with bags of clothes and fast food wrappers all over the back seat. Turns out he had some kind of mental illness and had been driving around the area for months, just watching kids and following them home. The police said he hadn't hurt anyone, but it was still serious. After that, Dad installed security cameras all around our house. He walked us to school every morning for weeks, and Mom always picked us up after practice, no matter how busy she was. I never felt completely safe walking home again. Even after they said the guy was in custody, I kept checking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. It made me realize how vulnerable we were, how fast something normal could turn into something dangerous. I used to think our neighborhood was safe, but now I know that sometimes the people who seem harmless from a distance are the ones you should be most careful of. When I was 16, my dad was an alcoholic who beat me and my little sister whenever he had too much to drink, which was basically every night. Mom was too scared to leave him or call the police because he threatened to kill us all if she tried. I remember coming home from school, hearing the TV blaring through the door, knowing what was waiting. Sometimes he'd be asleep in his chair, cigarette still burning down to the filter, a bottle of whiskey by his feet, and you'd want to tiptoe so you didn't wake him. Most nights, though, it didn't matter how quiet you were. He'd find some reason. My sister used to hide under her bed, pressing a pillow to her mouth so he wouldn't hear her crying. I started sleeping with a hoodie on so the bruises wouldn't show at school. That summer, something in me just snapped. It was one night after he threw a glass at Mom and the pieces cut her arm. She was shaking so bad she couldn't hold a towel over the wound. I knew then it was never going to stop. He wasn't going to just wake up one day and decide to be different. He'd always say, "You want to eat in this house, you live by my rules." But his rules changed every day. After that, I started planning. I looked up places to sleep in the woods, asked my friend Jason if he knew anywhere people didn't go. He told me about these old hunting cabins about 10 miles from town, way past the last houses, deep into the trees. He'd heard about them from his cousin, said they were left over from when the old paper mill still let hunters come through in the off-season. I saved food from dinner, packed it in my backpack every night instead of eating it. I found a padlock in the garage, still in the plastic. I took it, stashing it at the bottom of my bag. Every day I watched my dad more closely, looking for a sign he'd notice what I was doing, but he never paid attention unless he wanted something. My sister didn't ask questions. I think she knew what I was up to. She watched me with these wide, empty eyes when I zipped up my backpack that last night. The night I left, it was muggy. Bugs humming around the porch light, the whole house stinking of spilled beer and old meat. Dad was passed out on the couch, his mouth open, TV still playing some war movie. Mom was in the kitchen, picking up the pieces of a plate he'd broken at dinner. I watched her from the hall, trying to memorize her face in that moment, wondering if she'd hate me for running. I left a note on her pillow, just a few lines, saying I was safe, but couldn't come back until he was gone. No goodbye. I crawled out my bedroom window, careful not to let it squeak, then slipped through the backyard, my backpack strapped tight. It was just after midnight. I walked along the edge of the road, keeping behind the trees every time I saw headlights. My shoes were too small, digging into my heels, but I just kept moving. The air was heavy and wet, and everything sounded louder than it should. I checked over my shoulder every couple minutes, not sure what I was expecting. The farther I got from the house, the lighter I felt, even with my stomach twisting itself into knots. I hit the edge of the woods right as a truck rumbled by, so I ducked down, waiting for the red taillights to disappear before crossing into the trees. The path Jason described was easy to find. 2 deep ruts cut through weeds, leading off into blackness. I followed it with my flashlight off, using my hands to feel ahead. The ground was muddy in spots, but after a while it turned to packed dirt, drier under the trees. My legs ached, and I started counting my steps to distract myself. The woods were thick, branches scraping my arms, birds rustling overhead. It felt like the world shrank down to just the circle of light around my feet and the shapes of the trees. I walked for hours, or maybe it just felt that way because I was scared to stop. I didn't see any signs of people, no old tire tracks or wrappers or anything, just moss and broken limbs. At some point, I realized I was crying, but I wiped it away and kept going. I found the cabins right before sunrise. There were 3 of them, all gray with age, roofs caved in on 2, but one was still mostly together. The door hung a little crooked, but the hinges looked good. No broken windows, just dirty glass. I circled around, shoving aside fallen branches, looking for any signs someone was using the place. It smelled old and damp inside, but nothing seemed fresh. There was a little table and a metal bed frame against one wall. I set my backpack down, peeled off my shoes, and checked the cabinets. Nothing but dust and an old spider web. I took out the padlock and clicked it onto the door latch from the inside. It felt weird, putting a lock on something so empty, but I did it anyway. I sat on the bed frame, breathing in the dark until my heart slowed down. I listened to the woods waking up, birds calling to each other, leaves brushing against the cabin. My whole body hurt, but I lay back anyway, staring up at the beams overhead, and waited for it to get light. The first 3 days in the woods went better than I expected. I found a cabin that was in pretty good shape with a solid door and no broken windows. The previous hunters had left behind some canned food, and there was a clear stream about 100 yards away for drinking water. I put my padlock on the door so I could sleep without worrying about animals or people getting in. During the day, I explored the area and found wild berry bushes for extra food. At night, I read books by flashlight and actually felt peaceful for the first time in years. I started thinking maybe I could make this work until I turned 18 and could get my own apartment. On the 4th night, I was reading when I heard footsteps outside the cabin. At first, I thought maybe it was just an animal, but then I heard the steps crunch on the gravel right in front of the door. I put my flashlight out and crouched behind the table. Through a crack in the wall, I saw a man walking up, his shoulders hunched and a rifle hanging from one hand. He stopped right in front of the cabin and looked straight at the door. For a second, I wondered if maybe he just found the place by accident, but the way he moved made me feel like he already knew someone was inside. He tried the door handle, rattling it back and forth. The padlock held, but I could hear the frustration in the way he yanked on it. "Come out here right now," he yelled, his voice muffled by the wood. He hit the door with something heavy, probably the butt of his rifle. Each slam made the whole cabin shake. I slid down to the floor and crawled under my sleeping bag, pressing myself as far into the corner as I could. I could hear his boots scraping against the wood as he paced around outside. He started yelling again, words slurred and angry, then kicked at the bottom of the door hard enough to make the hinges creak. For a long time, he just kept at it, shouting and banging. Once or twice, he'd go quiet and I'd think he'd left, but then he'd start yelling again, this time even louder. At one point, he picked up something metal and slammed it against the side of the cabin. The sound echoed through the trees and I wondered if anyone nearby would hear. I didn't dare move or make a sound. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold onto the edge of the sleeping bag. Every time he hit the door, I thought it was going to split open and he'd come in and find me. I didn't know what he wanted. He never called me by a name or said what he was looking for. Just kept yelling and cursing and demanding that I come out. He threatened to shoot through the door, and for a moment I believed he really would. I clamped my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't cry out. It felt like it went on forever. Then I heard him fire his rifle. 2 deafening shots slammed into the door. Splinters flew, and I could see daylight through the new holes. They were about 3 feet above my head. I didn't move, just pressed myself flat on the floor, barely breathing. He started circling the cabin, kicking at the base of the walls and slamming the butt of his gun against the glass. The window rattled but didn't break. My teeth were chattering, but I didn't dare make a sound. He cursed and called me names I couldn't even make out, his voice going hoarse. After a while, the noises faded. I listened, heart pounding, trying to pick out every sound from outside. He stomped around the side, muttering to himself, then walked off into the woods. I didn't know if he'd really left, or if he was just waiting for me to come out. I stayed curled in the corner until my legs were numb. It was still dark, but the birds started chirping, and the light came up through the cracks in the wood. I waited until I could see the sun on the floor before I even moved. When I finally got up, I crawled over and peered through the bullet holes in the door. There were boot prints in the dirt, deep and sharp, circling the cabin in a rough path. No sign of him anywhere, just silence. I waited another half hour, listening for any movement in the trees. When I was sure he was really gone, I unlocked the door and stepped out. The air was cold and wet. My hands were shaking as I checked the clearing, but there was nothing, just the marks from his boots and 2 empty shell casings lying in the mud. I went back inside and stuffed everything I had into my backpack. I grabbed the leftover cans and shoved my books in with my clothes. I left the padlock hanging on the door and didn't look back. Every time a branch snapped or something moved in the undergrowth, I thought it was him coming back with more people or a bigger gun. I didn't eat or stop for water, just walked as fast as I could, tripping over roots and rocks, shoes pinching my toes with every step. The sky was gray and flat, and the woods felt twice as big as when I'd come in. By the time I reached the road, my legs were like jelly and my throat was dry. I kept thinking I'd see his truck or someone waiting, but the only thing that passed was a mail van that didn't even slow down. I stuck to the ditch, ducking whenever I heard a car. When I finally got to the edge of town, the sun was already high, burning off the fog. I walked the back streets, trying to stay hidden, until I got to our block. The house was quiet when I walked in. Mom was at the table, her face pale and tired, my sister sitting beside her. When Mom saw me, she stood up and ran over, wrapping me in a hug so tight it hurt. She started crying and saying she was sorry, over and over, for not protecting us, for not getting us out sooner. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her back and tried not to start crying too. That afternoon, we found out Dad had been arrested 2 days earlier. He'd started a fight at a bar, broke a guy's nose, and the police had finally locked him up. Mom said it happened right after I left, that he'd come home furious and then stormed out to drink. I guess the neighbors called the cops when they heard the screaming. He got 6 months in jail for assault and breaking parole. While he was away, we moved in with my aunt in another state. Mom never went back for any of his things. About a month later, we heard from the police about the man in the woods. He was a local farmer, owned most of the land around those cabins. He'd had problems with homeless people and squatters stealing from him, so he'd started patrolling his property with a rifle. When he found the cabin locked up, he assumed it was someone dangerous. The police said he was known for being aggressive and had a record of threatening trespassers. They told us I was lucky he didn't break down the door or decide to burn the place. He wasn't charged, just given a warning and told to call the sheriff next time. We never went back to that town. Mom got a job at a diner and my sister started at a new school. I kept my backpack under my bed for a long time just in case. Even after Dad got out, we didn't see him. Last we heard, he'd moved to another city. I never went camping or hiking alone again. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the sound of the rifle slamming into that door, the way the man's voice echoed through the trees. Running away saved my life, but it nearly got me killed anyway. I learned there's always someone more dangerous out there, even when you think you've left the worst behind. So, when I was 17, me and my two best friends, Carter and Blake, were looking for something exciting to do during summer break in our boring Phoenix suburb. Most days, we just wandered around the neighborhood or sat on our phones at the park, talking about dumb stuff. That summer felt extra slow, every day hot and the same. There was this old house on the edge of town, not far from a dried-up canal. Everybody called it the Raymond Place, but nobody we knew had ever been inside. The last family moved out after foreclosure about 3 years back. No one else bought it, so it just sat there, empty, getting worse every month. The front yard was all weeds and brown grass, higher than my knees in some spots. There was an old, rusty mailbox that leaned so far over it looked like it would fall with a strong wind. All the windows were covered with plywood, some old and warped, some newer where people had tried to break in. You could see spray paint on the boards and faded stickers peeling off the door. Kids at school said it was haunted, but nobody really believed that. It was just abandoned and ugly, and that made it kind of interesting. One afternoon, Blake started talking about the house while we sat on the curb eating gas station snacks. He kept joking about how nobody had the guts to go inside, and how we should try it for fun. Carter, who always wanted to show off, laughed and said he'd go in if someone dared him. Blake grinned and said, "All right, I dare you to go inside, take a selfie from the upstairs window, and post it to our Instagram." Carter just shrugged, acting like it was nothing. He always liked being the one who took things further than everyone else. We agreed to do it that Friday night, when it would be dark enough to not be seen, but early enough that the neighborhood was quiet. I borrowed my mom's old digital camera in case Carter's phone died, and Blake brought a little flashlight. We parked down the street from the Raymond place, far enough so that nobody would notice us getting out of the car. There were some street lights, but they didn't reach the end of the road. The air was heavy and still, just a few bugs humming. We walked along the sidewalk, keeping our heads down. At the end of the street, we cut through someone's yard and slipped into the alley behind the house. The back fence was mostly falling over, with broken boards and a gap big enough for us to squeeze through. The backyard looked even worse than the front, filled with trash, weeds, and an old plastic playset tipped on its side. A shed door banged open in the wind, hitting the wall with a dull, hollow sound. Blake checked to see if anyone was around. There was one house next door with a porch light on, but no one in sight. We crouched behind a bush, trying not to make any noise. Carter pushed through some dead branches and walked right up to the back door. He put his hand on the knob and turned it slowly. The door creaked, loud enough that I held my breath. For a second, I thought he'd back out, but he just smirked at us and slipped inside. It was dark inside, but Carter's phone flashlight made a weak glow on the dirty tile floor. The house smelled sour, like mold and old paint. We stayed outside, crouched low near the back steps, not wanting to draw attention. Blake whispered, "He better hurry," glancing over his shoulder at the neighbor's fence. I looked through one of the broken windows. Carter's light bobbed around, passing over a toppled chair and a torn curtain hanging sideways from the window frame. The wind picked up, making the weeds brush against my legs. It felt strange to just wait there, not knowing what Carter was doing inside. The house was so quiet, except for our breathing and the soft scrape of Carter's footsteps on the wood floor. I watched his flashlight move through the kitchen, then out of sight down the hall. A minute passed, then another. Blake started shifting from foot to foot. He glanced at the road and whispered, "This is stupid, dude. If anyone sees us, we're screwed." I kept my eyes on the window, trying to follow the little glow as it flickered from room to room. The air coming from inside the house was colder than outside, but it carried a damp smell that made me wrinkle my nose. Suddenly, Carter's light disappeared. I guessed he was heading upstairs like we planned to get the selfie. Blake leaned over to me and muttered, "If he's not out in 5, I'm leaving." I tried to keep calm, justifying that Carter was probably fine, just messing around to make us nervous. But every second that passed, the night felt heavier, like the whole yard was holding its breath. I kept checking the houses around us, watching for anyone moving behind a window or a dog barking. The house next door was still quiet. A streetlight flickered a few times and then went out. Blake started to pace in a small circle, looking ready to run. I stood still, waiting, watching the upper windows for any sign of Carter. After a while, that felt too long. I finally saw a shadow move behind the second-story window facing the backyard. A second later, Carter appeared, grinning down at us through a cracked pane. The glass looked cloudy, but we could see him clearly enough. He waved, holding up his phone. Blake let out a breath and laughed, shaking his head. Carter made a stupid face and then snapped a few photos, his arm outstretched to get the right angle. He leaned on the windowsill, giving us a big thumbs up. The boards covering that window must have been loose, because he managed to slide one to the side just enough to poke his head out. Blake hissed, "Get down, idiot." But Carter just laughed and took a few more selfies, not caring who might see. He stuck his hand out the window, waved again, and then turned his phone to show us the screen, proving he'd taken the shots. For a few seconds, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Carter gave us another big thumbs up and smiled, like nothing was wrong at all. Carter was supposed to come right back down, but we didn't see his flashlight for several more minutes. Blake started pacing in the weeds, looking more anxious every second. He kept saying, "Why is he taking so long?" and looking up at the window like Carter was going to pop out any minute. I tried to listen for footsteps, but all I could hear was the hum of traffic from the main road and the wind moving through the grass. I cupped my hands around my mouth and called Carter's name quietly, but there was no answer. The dark upstairs window just stared back at us. Then, out of nowhere, we heard voices from inside the house. It sounded like Carter, but there was another voice too. Older, rough, hard to make out. The words were muffled and tense. Blake and I froze, crouched in the weeds, trying to figure out if we should run or help. The voices went quiet for a few seconds, then started up again, a little louder. We couldn't tell if Carter was arguing or just explaining something. I looked at Blake and saw he was getting pale, gripping his phone so tight his knuckles were white. After what felt like forever, Carter came back to the upstairs window. He didn't wave or smile this time. He leaned out, glancing nervously behind him, and motioned for us to come closer to the house. We hesitated, but he kept waving us on, so we crept up to the back wall, sticking close to the shadows. Carter leaned out as far as he could and whispered, "There's a guy up here. He's not dangerous. Don't call anyone." His eyes kept darting behind him, and his voice shook as he explained, "He's just staying in one of the bedrooms. Doesn't want trouble. Please don't call the cops. He said he's been here a while. Just leave him alone." Blake and I exchanged a look. I didn't know what to do or say. Carter looked scared, not just nervous, but genuinely shaken. He told us he was coming down, to wait by the door and not make any noise. We stood by the steps, listening to the sound of Carter's shoes on the stairs, and then the back door creaked open. Carter slipped outside, looking over his shoulder, and pulled the door shut behind him. We didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stood there listening to our own breathing and the sound of distant cars. Finally, Carter started talking, his voice low and quick. He told us the guy upstairs was probably in his 50s, with gray hair and an old flannel jacket, skinny and tired looking. The man said he'd lost his job and his apartment earlier that year and had nowhere else to go. He'd been sleeping in the empty house for months, using cardboard and old blankets for a bed. Carter said he saw a little pile of canned food in the closet, some water bottles, and a backpack with clothes in it. "He just wants to be left alone," Carter said, almost whispering. He thought I was someone coming to kick him out. I told him we were just here on a dare and we'd leave. He asked us not to tell anyone. He's scared he'll get arrested if the cops find him. Blake looked uncomfortable, shuffling his feet and staring at the ground. "He's not going to hurt anybody," Carter said. "He just wants to stay warm and out of trouble." For a minute, none of us said anything. I thought about how weird it was to see someone living like that, in a place we only thought of as a joke or a dare. Carter looked like he felt guilty. "He made me promise," Carter said. "We won't say anything, right?" Blake nodded. I nodded too. It didn't seem right to get the man in trouble when he wasn't bothering anyone. We slipped back out through the broken fence, careful not to make noise, and walked quickly down the street to where we parked. Nobody talked much on the way home. That night, I kept thinking about the man upstairs in the dark, eating cold food and trying not to be noticed. The house didn't seem as scary anymore, just sad. The next day, we met up at the park, all of us quieter than usual. We talked about what we should do. Blake said, "He can't live there forever. What if something happens to him? Or the place catches fire or something?" I didn't know what to say. Carter kept looking at the ground, kicking little stones. He said he felt bad for the man, but also worried about leaving him there, hidden away and alone. Blake pulled out his phone and started searching for homeless shelters in Phoenix. He found a number for the city's social services department and read that they help people get into shelters or find programs for food and housing. We all agreed we didn't want to get the guy arrested or cause more trouble for him, but maybe if someone reached out, he'd get help. We waited a day, just in case, but none of us could stop thinking about it. The next afternoon, I called the social services number Blake found. I didn't say my name or anything, just told them there was a man living in the old Raymond place and that he might need help. They asked for the address, and I gave it to them, then hung up. I felt nervous afterward, not sure if we did the right thing, but hoping it would at least give the man a chance at something better. A few weeks later, we drove by the Raymond place and saw city workers at the house, putting up heavy boards on the doors and windows. There was a city truck parked out front and a police cruiser down the street, but we didn't stop or get close. We never found out what happened to the man who'd been living there. None of us ever went back. Sometimes I still think about him, where he went, if he got help, or if he just found another place to hide for a while. That summer, everything changed a little for me. It made me realize how fast someone's life could fall apart, and how easy it was for everyone else not to notice. Every time I passed a homeless person after that, I thought of the man in the old house, and felt lucky just to have a family, a bed, a place to go. There are a lot of people who don't, and sometimes you don't even see them until you end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right place, depending on how you look at it. When I was 26, I was working as a programmer, mostly from home. My schedule was weird, so I ended up hitting the gym around midnight, sometimes later, because it was the only time the place was actually empty. I liked that. No crowds, no loud conversations, no waiting for a machine. I just put in my headphones, zoned out, and got it done. That particular week, my car was in the shop for some engine work. Instead of waiting around, I figured I could just walk the 2 miles to the gym and back. It would suck if it rained, but it was summer, and honestly, I didn't mind the extra cardio. The gym was one of those chain places, cheap and open 24 hours, but at midnight, it always felt kind of abandoned. When I got there, I scanned my key card and let myself in. The fluorescent lights flickered a little, and the air inside had that stale sweat smell. Most nights, I'd be completely alone except for maybe one staff guy. But that night, even the staff wasn't at the front desk. Just the hum of machines and the sound of my sneakers on the rubber floor. I started my usual routine, rower for 10 minutes, then weights. 30 minutes in, I was getting into it, sweat dripping down my back, breathing heavy. That's when I noticed movement outside the front window. This huge guy was standing just beyond the glass, hands in his pockets, staring in. He had a thick beard, shaved head, probably 6'3", and heavy enough to fill out the front of a hoodie even in summer. At first I thought maybe he was just waiting for a ride or something, but then he came right up to the door and started banging on it with his fist. He didn't have a membership card, just a clenched fist and a scowl. He started yelling, "Hey, open up!" I could hear him even through my music. I took out my earbuds, glanced at the wall clock, 1:07 a.m. I shook my head, gestured through the glass, tried to tell him with my hands that I couldn't open the door. The gym had a strict policy about letting people in without their own card, especially at night. I knew better than to break that rule, and there were cameras everywhere. The guy slammed his palm on the glass harder. "Let me in! Just 5 minutes, come on!" He was getting red in the face. He looked around and then started circling the building, walking past each window and banging with his fist as he passed. He shouted stuff I couldn't really make out except for, "I know you see me," and some cursing. I tried to ignore him and focus on my set, but every time he rounded the corner of the building, I could hear the boom of his fists on the glass or the metal side door. I kept my eyes on the weights, but my skin was prickling. It's one thing to have someone yell from the street, but he just kept going. 10 minutes, maybe more. He'd stop at the front and just stare in at me. I watched his reflection in the mirror every time I racked the weights. He never took his hands out of his pockets unless it was to bang on something. Eventually, he walked out of sight around the back, but I still heard footsteps, maybe his boots crunching on the gravel behind the gym. I checked my phone, thinking about calling the cops, but I kept telling myself he'd get bored and leave if I just ignored him. The place was quiet again for a minute, except for my own breathing and the clank of weights. I was trying not to look nervous, but my hands were shaking a little when I grabbed the bar for my next set. That's when headlights swung across the front windows. A black SUV rolled slowly into the parking lot and just sat there, engine idling. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see who was inside. I paused, dumbbell half lifted, and watched the headlights wash over the empty treadmills. The angry guy was gone, but now the SUV was parked 2 spaces from the door. No one getting out, no one moving inside. It just sat there. I finished my set anyway, watching the vehicle from the corner of my eye, trying to act normal. I thought maybe it was just someone waiting for a friend or an Uber, but the engine stayed on and it didn't budge. I went over to the water fountain, eyes on the windows. Nothing. The SUV's brake lights glowed in the dark. The neighborhood was empty. All the shops around closed hours ago. The gym was at the end of a strip mall, the kind of place where everything looks deserted after 9 p.m. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I didn't take off my headphones or let my guard down. I went through my cool-down routine fast, keeping an eye on the parking lot the whole time. Every so often, I'd see a shape move in the front seat. No one got out. The SUV just kept running, like it was waiting for something. Finally, I decided I was done. I wiped down the equipment, grabbed my bag, and moved toward the exit, heart pounding in my ears. I looked around, no sign of the big guy, but the SUV was still sitting there, engine rumbling. I thought about asking someone for a ride, but the lot was empty. I pulled my hood up, stepped out into the humid air, and started walking down the main road, trying not to look back. My route took me past the gas station, under the glare of the overhead lights. My backpack felt heavy, and every sound seemed too loud in the empty street. I figured once I got a few blocks away, the weirdness would be over. I kept my pace steady, watching the dark shop fronts and the occasional passing car. But the whole walk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and every time I did, I felt more certain that the night wasn't done with me yet. At the gas station, I stepped inside and grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler. The place was nearly empty, just one sleepy cashier behind the counter and a guy messing with the coffee machine in the back. I glanced out the big glass windows while I waited to pay, and that's when I saw him. The big guy from the gym was standing beside the black SUV, fumbling with something in his pocket, eyes scanning the street. I ducked my head, paid for my water as quickly as I could, and slipped out without looking back. My heart was racing now. This wasn't just some weird coincidence. He wasn't yelling or making a scene anymore. He just got into the passenger side of the SUV, closed the door quietly, and the car started rolling. I tried to keep my walk normal, but my hands were shaking. My apartment was still a mile away, through a bunch of winding streets where the streetlights were spaced too far apart. The SUV turned out of the gas station and started creeping behind me, headlights off at first. As I got further from the main road and closer to the residential area, they flipped on their high beams, flooding the sidewalk ahead of me with harsh white light. They kept just far enough back that if I turned to look, I couldn't make out their faces. It was obvious they wanted me to know I was being followed. I cut across the street and walked faster, then turned down a smaller road hoping they'd keep going. Instead, the SUV sped up and took a sharp turn, cutting me off a block ahead. My chest felt tight. I turned into an alley, started jogging, and then broke into a full sprint when I heard the tires squeal as they pulled a U-turn. My shoes slapped the pavement as I darted between two houses and jumped a low fence, desperate to get off the main street. I could hear the engine revving as the SUV circled the block, trying to keep me in their headlights. I ran through backyards and cut between garages, looking for somewhere to hide. But the SUV was faster, and they seemed to know the area. Every time I thought I'd lost them, they appeared again at the next intersection, idling there with the passenger door open. The side streets were empty, nobody out, and I realized how alone I was out there in the dark. I cut across a small park and heard the SUV accelerate again. They managed to get ahead of me, blocking the only open way back toward my apartment complex. The driver idled in the road while the big guy stepped out, holding a baseball bat by his side, not swinging it, just holding it like he didn't care who saw. That's when I lost it. I sprinted toward the nearest house, banged on the door with both fists, and yelled for help, screaming that someone was trying to kill me. Porch lights flicked on up and down the block. Curtains moved, voices started shouting from inside the houses. I kept pounding, yelling for someone to call 911. The guy with the bat froze, looking from me to the suddenly lit up street. Inside the SUV, someone started honking the horn over and over, the sound echoing off the houses. I heard more doors opening, people stepping onto their porches. The big guy hesitated, glancing back at the SUV, and finally turned and ran for it. The car peeled away, tires screeching, leaving me gasping on the porch. A middle-aged man opened the door, looked at me like he wasn't sure if I was drunk or dying, but when I blurted out that I was being chased, he pulled me inside and locked the door. His wife called out from the kitchen, asking if everything was okay. I heard more voices outside, neighbors coming out, some of them yelling at the retreating SUV. The man handed me a towel for my face, though I was just sweating, and led me to their living room, asking what happened. I tried to explain, voice shaking, while his wife picked up the phone to call the police. A couple minutes later, their teenage son came in from the hallway, looking wide-eyed, asking if I was hurt. The family said they'd seen the SUV circle the block a few times before I banged on their door. The wife kept looking through the window, making sure the car was really gone. After a minute or two, I heard more sirens in the distance. Probably someone else had already called. The family insisted on driving me home, and I didn't argue. I just wanted to get out of there. They waited until the police came by, gave a quick statement, and then offered me a ride. I kept thinking about the big guy with the bat, the way he hesitated when the lights came on, and the way the driver honked the horn like he was panicking. The ride back to my apartment was silent, except for the hum of the car and my own heavy breathing. The dad dropped me off at my front door, waited until I got inside, and gave me a thumbs up before driving away. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I filed a police report, described the SUV, both men, and everything that happened. The cop took notes, asked if I'd seen the license plate, but I hadn't. He told me they'd send a car around the neighborhood, but I never heard back. A week later, I talked to the gym manager. He said they'd had people try to get in after hours, even a couple of thefts, but never anything like this. He looked at me like he wanted to ask more, but didn't. After that night, I switched to a new gym, closer to home, with better lighting and more people around. I only went during the day, and I never walked there again. Sometimes, when I'm out late or walking home, I'll catch a glimpse of a dark SUV turning a corner or see someone watching from a car, and I get that feeling in my stomach again. Looking back, I think those guys were looking for someone to rob, and when I wouldn't open the door at the gym, they decided to follow me. I still wonder what would have happened if those homeowners hadn't opened their door, or if no one had turned on their lights. Now, every time I lock up at night, I check the street and remind myself how close it came to ending very differently. When I was 17, my Uncle Richard took me camping near Lake Tahoe for a weekend fishing trip. He was a park ranger and knew all the out-of-the-way places tourists never found. The drive out took hours, winding up the highway and into the forest. The sun was already dropping behind the hills by the time we turned off onto a bumpy service road. The trees were close on both sides, thick pine and tangled undergrowth, so close it looked like the forest would swallow the truck. My uncle talked the whole time about how the fishing would be better than anything I'd tried before. How he'd found the spot during a boundary check years ago, and no one else ever came out that far. I remember watching the old radio bouncing on its cracked mount as we bumped along, the air getting cooler. He didn't play music, just talked about fish, eagles, the river, and asked about school in short bursts. We reached the valley in the last hour of daylight. The place felt sealed off from the world, ringed in by tree-covered hills. There was a patch of level ground at the edge of the woods with a view of the water, and my uncle told me, "This is it." I helped unload the truck, carrying packs and a faded green cooler down a slope to a spot he'd picked out near a big flat boulder. The air had that pine smell, stronger than any city park, and it was quiet, just wind and birds. We set up 2 small tents, a fire ring of blackened stones, and laid out the rods and tackle boxes. Uncle Richard was always careful, showing me how to tie lines, which hooks to use, the right way to store our food, and where to stack extra firewood. He took out a small gas stove and made us grilled cheese sandwiches and soup for dinner. While we ate, he went over the plan for the next day. Up early, fish the stream until noon, break for lunch, then hike a bit farther upriver. That first night, I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the forest sounds and my uncle's steady snoring through the tent walls. It got cold, colder than I expected, and when I got up to pee, the ground was damp and covered in pine needles. The sky was black, packed with stars. Everything looked different at night, sharper, the edges of the trees cutting into the sky. In the morning, sunlight through the mesh above my head woke me. My uncle was already up, making coffee and checking the rods. He handed me a dented tin cup, and we ate granola bars for breakfast. There was a mist on the water and dew on the grass. We fished for a few hours, caught nothing but small trout, which my uncle threw back with a shake of his head. The day was slow, quiet, and we spent the afternoon sitting on rocks by the water. Lunch was cold cuts, bread, apples. He pointed out a few spots where fish jumped and told me stories about hikers getting lost or black bears coming down for food. After lunch, my uncle stood, stretched, and told me he wanted to check a set of lines and gear he'd left down by the stream the day before. He said it was about a half-mile away, not far, and he'd be back in an hour or so. "Keep an eye on the camp," he said, "and maybe get a fire going for dinner." I watched him walk off through the brush, the back of his jacket already blending into the trees. I was alone, but it felt fine at first. I wandered around the site, kicked pine cones, poked at the fire ring with a stick, and checked inside the tents to make sure the sleeping bags were dry. The forest was so quiet, the only sounds were the wind, some distant birds, and a far-off splash that might have been a fish, or maybe just a branch dropping in the water. I broke up some fallen sticks and stacked them in the fire pit, found some old newspaper in the supplies, and tried to get a fire started. The wood was a bit damp, and the smoke smelled sharp. About 45 minutes passed, maybe an hour. I was squatting by the fire, feeding it little twigs, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, half expecting my uncle, but instead saw a guy in camo pants, muddy boots, and a baggy brown jacket. He had a camo cap, scruffy beard, and a big green backpack. I froze, trying to decide if he was just a hiker or something else. He walked right into the campsite like he'd been there before, not shy or hesitant. He nodded at me and set his bag down, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hey," he said, voice scratchy. "Name's Frank. You mind if I fill my bottle? Been hiking a while." He didn't look at me much, just at the water jug sitting by the cooler. He unscrewed the top of a battered plastic bottle and held it out. I nodded and stood up, a little wary. He glanced around at our gear, eyes moving over everything. Cooler, camp chairs, tackle box, both tents. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. "We got plenty. Help yourself." I watched as he crouched by the jug, filling his bottle. He was quiet for a second, then started asking questions. "You guys here long?" he said, shaking his bottle and screwing on the cap. "Just passing through, or you camping all weekend?" Just a weekend trip," I said, not sure why I felt like lying, but I did. "Heading out tomorrow." Frank nodded, not really looking at me. He started digging in his pack, then asked, "You got anybody else with you, or just you and your dad?" He jerked his chin at the second tent. "My uncle," I said. "He's a ranger. Just stepped out to check some lines." I tried to keep my voice normal, but something about the way he kept glancing over my shoulder put me on edge. "Ah, cool," he said, his tone flat. "You guys got any fancy gear? Radios? Sat phones? People bring all sorts of stuff up here." He grinned, but it looked forced. He started edging closer to the tents, looking at our folding table, the food containers, and the stove. I moved a little, stepping between him and the tents as he peered at the zippers. "Just the usual camping stuff," I said. "Nothing too expensive." My heart was starting to thump, but I tried to look busy, fussing with the fire. Frank moved toward the nearest tent, ducking down like he was trying to see inside. "Which one you sleeping in?" he asked. "Bet it gets cold at night." He was looking not at me, but at the bag near my feet, and then over to where my uncle had stacked the fishing rods. I stepped in front of him, keeping my body between him and the tent door. "Yeah, it does. But we're used to it," I said. I tried to keep my voice friendly but firm, not wanting to sound scared. He shifted his weight, looking around the clearing, taking in every detail. His eyes kept flicking from the tents to our food, then to the trail where my uncle had disappeared. He asked, "So, your uncle's a ranger, huh? He out for a while?" He said it like he was just making small talk, but he kept glancing at the trees. Something was wrong, and I felt it stronger the longer he stood there. He wasn't just some lost hiker. The way he kept moving his head, the way his hands didn't stay still, how his eyes never settled. It all felt off. I tried to stand my ground, staying between him and the gear, hoping my uncle would come back soon. Frank looked at me, and then at the water jugs, as if measuring whether he could take them. I watched his every move, not saying anything, just blocking his way. Frank kept talking, but the questions didn't let up. He wanted to know if anyone else knew where we were, if we'd checked in with anyone before heading out, and exactly when we were supposed to head home. He asked it in this roundabout way, like he was making conversation. but I could feel how focused he was. His eyes were on me, and his fingers kept tapping at his backpack straps, never settling. I tried to act casual, but my voice was too loud when I said, "Yeah, my uncle is actually meeting 2 other rangers today, and they'll all be back soon." I made it sound like a big group, hoping it would put him off. The change in him was immediate. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted to the edge of the trees behind me. He stopped looking at our stuff and looked at the woods instead, then back at me, sizing things up. I realized then this wasn't just some awkward outdoorsman. He was nervous because he thought someone else might walk in any second. Frank stopped asking about fishing and started shifting side to side, making like he was going to leave, then changing his mind. He glanced at the tent again and started, "Mind if I just take a look inside, see what kind of setup you got?" His tone was off, way too friendly, and he took a step like he might just push past me. I moved quickly, stepping right in front of the tent flap, pretending to check the zippers. My hands were shaking. I backed toward the camp table, where we kept our emergency whistle clipped to a lantern handle. My mind raced through what I'd do if he tried anything. Grab the whistle, yell, run, anything to make noise. He watched me, silent now, like he was weighing the odds. Frank's attention snapped to the path behind me. Heavy footsteps crunched the pine needles. Then Uncle Richard's voice called, "Everything good here?" I almost sagged with relief. Uncle Richard came out of the trees, and with him were 2 other men in ranger uniforms, each carrying radios and day packs. All 3 looked surprised to see Frank standing so close to the tent, and he instantly tried to play it off, waving and putting on a friendly face. "Sorry guys, just got turned around," Frank said, stepping back from our camp in a hurry. "Didn't mean to bother anyone, just looking for the main trail." He grabbed his backpack, gave us a short nod, and disappeared into the woods the way he'd come. None of the rangers bought it, but they didn't chase him. He was already gone, melting back into the trees. My uncle came right over, eyes scanning the camp. "You okay?" "What did he want?" he asked. I told him everything. How Frank kept pressing for details, wanting to look inside our tents and asking about when we'd leave. The other rangers didn't look surprised, just angry. One of them said, "We've had a few reports of trouble out here. People casing campsites, asking questions, sometimes coming back at night." Uncle Richard listened, jaw set, and then told me quietly to pack up my things. He walked the perimeter with the other 2 rangers, checking for signs anyone else had been watching us. They all looked at each other, talking in low voices. Uncle Richard pulled out his radio and called in the situation, giving a detailed description of Frank and which direction he'd gone. He made sure to mention the odd behavior, the questions, the camo gear, and the fact that Frank kept watching the woods. The dispatcher replied that they'd alert the patrols nearby and that we should move to a different, safer campsite for the night, one closer to the main ranger station and other campers. "We're not taking chances," Uncle Richard said, not bothering to hide his worry. "Let's pack up and go." We broke down camp fast, packing everything into the truck. I kept checking over my shoulder, waiting for Frank or someone else to show up out of the woods. The rangers stayed close the whole time, walking the edge of the clearing, making sure no one watched from the tree line. The drive back was quiet. I felt tense the whole way, watching the mirrors, feeling the eyes of the forest on us. We spent the last night of the trip at a crowded campsite next to the main ranger station, surrounded by other families, tents, and RVs. It wasn't as peaceful, but I felt safer. Uncle Richard and the other rangers stopped by again, checking to make sure we were okay, and asking if I'd remembered any other details about Frank. I told them everything I could remember: the camo, the beard, the backpack, the way he kept looking at the trees, and the way he seemed to change when I mentioned more rangers would be joining us. A couple of days later, after we'd already gone home, Uncle Richard called with an update. The park security and local police had caught a group of 3 men camped deep in the forest, hiding out near an old service road. One of them matched Frank's description exactly. The camo, the beard, the backpack, even the way he talked. The police found a pile of stolen gear in their camp. Expensive tents, coolers, electronics, fishing equipment. They'd been targeting remote campsites, finding out when people would be alone, then coming back after dark to rob them, sometimes threatening people if they were still there. The Rangers told Uncle Richard that Frank and his group had probably been scoping us out for the same reason, and if he hadn't shown up when he did, they would have tried something that night. After that trip, I kept camping, but I never stayed anywhere that far from help again. I always let people know where I'd be and when I planned to come back. I watched the people around me, never trusting anyone who asked too many questions or kept looking over their shoulder. The forest still felt like a good place, but I didn't take chances anymore. The valley by the lake looked peaceful when we drove away, but I knew how close things had come to being something else entirely. I never forgot how fast a perfect weekend can turn dangerous, or how sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't a wild animal, but the people hiding in the trees, waiting for you to be alone. When I was living in that tent camp outside of town, I never planned to stay there as long as I did. Oregon winters are tough when you're sleeping under a tarp, but I guess you get used to anything. The spot I had wasn't much, just an old military surplus tent, some patched up tarps, and a folding camp chair I'd grabbed at Goodwill. I had a fire ring made out of some cracked cinder blocks and a pile of wood I'd cut myself, though it was always damp. My drinking problem was bad that year. After I left the army, things just slid out from under me. Some nights I barely remembered making it back to camp. But you can't go to pieces out there, so I kept busy helping other people out when I could. Not everyone in those camps is a mess by choice. Some folks just had their lives go sideways real fast. That's how I met Tyler. I was at the bus station in town, waiting for a guy who said he might have a drywall gig, when I saw this kid sitting on a bench near the vending machines. Skinny, dirty blonde hair, probably weighed 100 pounds soaking wet. He looked like he hadn't eaten a real meal in a week, and he had that twitchy look, kept scanning every face that walked past, one hand always stuffed deep in his jacket pocket, like he was worried someone would try to take what little he had left. Most people in town ignored the homeless, but I could see right away he was new. He flinched whenever the Greyhound doors hissed open, like he half expected someone he knew to come off the bus. His shoes were torn up, and his backpack was almost empty, except for a dirty blanket. I remember he had a hospital bracelet on his wrist, faded blue with his name half rubbed off. Tyler. I asked him if he was waiting for someone, and he said no. Voice real quiet. He said he'd come up from Sacramento to get away from a foster family that used to hit him, and he'd been sleeping outside ever since. He'd tried to get into a shelter, but they wouldn't take him without ID, and he didn't know what to do next. I told him about the day labor pickup downtown, how sometimes you could get cash sweeping parking lots or hauling brush. He looked hungry and scared, and I figured he wouldn't last long sleeping behind the bus station. So I said, "You want some food?" He nodded but didn't say much, so I led him across the street to the grocery and bought a couple cans of chili, a loaf of bread, and a gallon of water. He kept looking around like he expected someone to yell at him. I told him he could crash at my spot for a night or two, just until he figured out his next move. We walked the couple miles out to the woods together, taking the long way along the river so nobody in town would hassle us. The camp was quiet when we got there, just the sound of rain hitting the tarp and the river moving slow. I set him up in an old tent someone left behind, gave him my extra sleeping bag. I started a fire, and we sat on 2 overturned milk crates, eating the chili with plastic spoons. He told me about running away, how he tried to stay out of sight because he thought someone might come looking for him, but nobody ever did. I told him about the food pantry near the train tracks and the church that sometimes gave out clean socks. He nodded along, listening close. I told him where the soup kitchen was, how if you got there early, you could sign up for the better day labor jobs. But you had to watch your stuff because sometimes the other guys would take your boots if you left them by the door. He said thanks more than once, voice real low. After a while, he started to relax a bit, sitting back and letting his hands warm up by the fire. It felt good helping him, honestly. I hadn't done anything for anybody else in a long time. Mostly just sat with my bottle and waited for it to get dark. But showing Tyler the ropes made me remember how it felt to be useful, to be the guy people could ask for advice. We sat up talking until late. He asked me about my army patch and I told him a little, just the parts I felt like sharing. Having someone to talk to, someone who needed me, made me feel almost normal again. Like maybe I wasn't just another screw-up camped out in the mud. I told him if he kept his head down and tried to find work, things might get better. It wasn't much hope, but it was something. The fire burned low and the woods were quiet, except for the river and a distant owl. I showed Tyler how to zip up the tent flap tight so the rain wouldn't blow in, and he crawled into the sleeping bag. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without finishing off my bottle. I woke up to the sound of something moving outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or one of the neighborhood cats. But then I saw a flash of white light moving between the trees. Not like a campfire or lightning, but the steady beam of a flashlight sweeping slow through the undergrowth. My hand went straight for my knife, the one I kept under my jacket. I didn't want Tyler to wake up scared, so I stayed quiet and kept my eyes on the edge of camp. The light bobbed along, stopping every few feet, then moving again. I watched as it flickered through the branches, sometimes vanishing behind a tree, then showing up closer than before. It wasn't just one quick look. Whoever it was, they were searching, slow and careful, scanning the ground and the tents. I could hear the brush rustling, the crunch of boots on wet leaves. I slid my boots on and crouched down behind my fire ring, keeping the knife loose in my hand. The pattern of the flashlight wasn't random. It moved from tree to tree, sweeping the ground like the person knew exactly where to look. Every couple of minutes, I'd hear a twig snap, followed by a pause, then footsteps. It wasn't an animal. Not with that kind of weight behind the steps. I listened for voices, for any sound that might tell me how many people were out there. But it was just the single light, always getting a little bit closer. Rain was still coming down, tapping on the tarps, but the sound of movement in the woods cut through it. Tyler shifted inside his tent, maybe waking up, but I didn't say anything. I stayed between him and the tree line, gripping the handle of my knife and waiting to see who or what was out there. The man exploded out of the trees without warning, the flashlight beam whipping around as he ran, catching Tyler in the face with the glare. He had a big knife in one hand, blade shining even in the dim light, and he lunged straight at the kid. There wasn't any time to think. I shoved Tyler as hard as I could, sending him sprawling toward the riverbank, and the guy slammed into me instead. I felt the blade slice across my left forearm, right above the wrist, burning hot. I grabbed his arm and tried to twist the knife away, but he was stronger than I expected. Older, thick arms, wild-eyed with dirt on his face. He was shouting the whole time, his words breaking up with every push and struggle. "You people ruin this place. You don't belong here. Nobody wants you here." His breath stank like rot and liquor. Tyler scrambled to his feet behind me. "Run!" I yelled, jerking my chin at the trees away from the road, but he hesitated just a second too long, frozen by the sight of all that blood. The man tried to shove past me, reaching for Tyler, but I managed to grab his jacket and pull him off balance. He slammed into the fire ring, sending cinder blocks flying, and I fell on top of him. The knife clattered loose for a second, but he grabbed it again, slicing at my side as he tried to get up. All I could think was to keep him away from the kid, keep him between me and Tyler no matter what. The woods echoed with shouting, boots sliding in the mud, metal scraping against the rocks. He got his face right up in mine, spit flying. "Should have cleaned this camp out weeks ago. You're all filth." The whole time, I could hear Tyler's footsteps pounding away through the brush, heading toward the town lights. My arm was bleeding badly, the sleeve soaked through, but I wasn't going to let him chase Tyler. He landed a few more wild punches, hit me across the jaw, then shoved me hard into the wet dirt. I saw his head snap up as distant sirens cut through the rain, short, sharp bursts from somewhere past the river, close enough to mean trouble. The guy hesitated just a second, glanced down at the blood running off my hand, then turned and bolted back into the woods without another word. The undergrowth cracked and snapped as he crashed away, flashlight beam bouncing wild. I lay there for a second, breathing hard, gripping my arm to slow the bleeding. Somewhere out past the trees, I heard the sound of a car engine and distant shouting, but I stayed down, waiting until I was sure the attacker was really gone. I used my shirt to tie up the arm as best I could, hands shaking. It wasn't enough to stop the blood, but it slowed it a little. The sirens got closer, cutting through the night, and blue lights flickered on the road by the bus station. Tyler must have made it there, found someone to help. I tried to shout for them but couldn't get enough breath. Just sat by the fire ring, legs stretched out, holding pressure on the cut and watching rainwater turn pink around my boots. The first cop came in with his flashlight, calling out, "Anyone here? Police!" I raised my hand, and they moved fast, 2 officers and a paramedic right behind. They kept their distance at first, asking what happened, if anyone else was there, who did this to me. I tried to explain, but my mouth kept going dry and I had to squeeze the cut tighter. The paramedic pressed gauze to my arm and taped it down. Then the other cops started combing through the camp, shining lights under the tarps and into the trees. "We got a call about a stabbing," one of them said. "Kid's safe. Can you walk?" I nodded, but they put me on a stretcher anyway and carried me up the muddy path to the ambulance. While they loaded me up, I saw Tyler standing under the streetlight, wrapped in a blanket someone had given him, face pale but alive. He looked at me, then away, rocking on his heels. The cop talked to him, writing notes fast, then handed him off to another officer. They gave me something for the pain, told me to keep my eyes open. As the ambulance doors closed, I heard a radio crackle about a suspect seen near the river road, description matching what Tyler told them. Big, gray jacket, hunting knife, flashlight. The paramedics drove me to the hospital, lights spinning through the rain, and I lost sight of the camp behind us. They stitched up my arm and kept me overnight, checking for nerve damage and making sure the cut didn't get infected. I answered a lot of questions from detectives. How long had I been in the woods? Did I know the guy? Had anything like this happened before? They told me the man who attacked us had been assaulting homeless people around the area for months. He'd show up at different camps at night, always with a knife, always ranting about cleaning up the town. 2 other people had been hospitalized before us, and the police had been looking for him but couldn't get a positive ID. Tyler's description changed that. They found the man hiding near his car on the road outside town, knife still on him, blood all over his sleeves. Detective came by the next morning, shook my hand and told me they finally had him on charges that would stick. Attempted murder, aggravated assault, all the rest. He said if Tyler hadn't run for help and given such a clear statement, the guy might have gotten away again. They found evidence in his car, maps, a list of camps, even a police scanner. He'd planned all of it, convinced he was doing something righteous. I stayed in the hospital 3 more days for observation, nurses coming in every few hours to check the bandages, making sure I didn't get an infection or lose too much movement in my hand. I spent a lot of time staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that happened, about how close it all came to ending different. Tyler came by once with a social worker, checking on me before he left town for a youth shelter. He didn't say much, just nodded, said thanks, and looked away when I told him he'd done the right thing. I found out later that Child Protective Services found a place for him in a home upstate, away from the old foster system and far from the camps. The hospital staff said he'd be okay, probably better off than he'd been in a long time. They let me out after the swelling went down, arm wrapped in fresh gauze, prescription for antibiotics in my pocket. The detective called me once more to say the guy had confessed to the attacks. He was going away for a long time. I went back to the camp, but I didn't stay long. Everything looked different, even with the tarp still there, the old fire ring still blackened. I packed up what I wanted to keep and moved closer to town, somewhere I could see the lights and hear traffic at night. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear footsteps in the woods, or see a flashlight out between the trees. The scar on my arm is ugly, thick, and pink, a reminder of how fast things can go bad. But when I see it, I remember what happened, how close I came to being just another body in the brush, and how one scared kid made it out because I was there. It doesn't make anything easier, but it reminds me that even if you're stuck at the bottom, sometimes the only thing standing between someone else and real danger is you. I don't pretend to have everything figured out, but I know that night didn't just change Tyler's life. It changed mine too. Helping someone, putting yourself on the line for them, even when you don't have much left to give. Sometimes that's the only thing that keeps you human. When I was 19 and living in a small apartment near my college campus in Seattle, most students went home for the summer, but I stayed to work at a local bookstore. My parents lived across the country, so I was used to being independent and didn't mind having the neighborhood mostly to myself. My building was old, 4 floors, mostly 1-bedroom units, kinda drafty. The hallway carpets always smelled faintly like mildew. You could hear everything that happened in the building. People talking, radios, pipes clanking, the elevator that clattered up and down every couple hours. It was a boring place in the summer, quiet except for a few older tenants and the occasional late-night drunk trying to buzz the wrong apartment. During the first week of June, I started finding weird stuff outside my front door every morning. First, it was just crumpled newspapers, balled up and kind of damp, like someone had dragged them out of a gutter. Then it was empty food containers, a crushed coffee cup with lipstick stains, a half-empty bag of chips that had gone stale. Sometimes there was random clothing, like a single glove or a sock, always just one. I thought maybe it was wind blowing trash around or someone losing things on their way up the stairs, but it only happened overnight. Every morning, the hallway was clean except for right in front of my door. I started picking everything up and throwing it away. Didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I figured if I just kept things tidy, it'd stop. But the next morning, there was more. An old receipt, a torn grocery bag, a faded baseball cap that looked like it had been rained on a few times. The items started to get stranger. A bent fork, a cheap plastic comb, a parking ticket from a different city. Always just sitting right on the doormat, lined up neatly. I noticed they were never just dropped. It was always like someone placed them on purpose. After the 3rd or 4th day, I checked with my neighbor, an old lady named Ruth, to see if she was having the same problem. She shook her head and said she hadn't seen anything weird, just the usual junk mail. She didn't get out much, Mostly watched TV with the volume up high and said maybe some kids were messing with me. But I didn't think it was kids. It was too quiet for that, and I never heard anyone in the hallway at night. The next morning, I found a single key sitting on my doormat. Not a house key or anything I recognized, just a small brass key like you'd use for a padlock or locker. There was a strip of red tape wrapped around the end. I stared at it for a minute, then tossed it in the trash with the rest. I started to feel uneasy in the mornings, checking the peephole before I opened the door. But I never saw anything. The hallway was empty, just the old brown carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. I went to work at the bookstore like usual. My shift started at 10, so I'd leave around 9:30, locking my door twice even though the deadbolt barely worked. The walk to work was nothing special, just a couple blocks down, past a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. Seattle in June is gray, the sidewalk's always a little wet, so I kept my hood up and my headphones in, trying not to think about the mess at my apartment. At night, I'd get home and check the hallway. Clean. Nothing on the floor. Nobody around. I tried to listen for sounds, but all I heard was the TV in Ruth's place and the usual elevator creaks. Sometimes the air felt heavier near my door, like someone had just been standing there. But I blamed it on my imagination. The pattern kept going for about a week. Every morning, new stuff. It wasn't just trash anymore. Once, it was a child's drawing, crumpled and wet, with faded stick figures holding hands. Another time, it was a spoon wrapped in a paper napkin. Each item was placed carefully, not just tossed or blown by the wind. No one else in the building seemed to notice, or maybe they just didn't care. By Thursday, I'd had enough. I went out and bought one of those cheap rubber door stops, hoping maybe it'd discourage whoever was doing it. That night, I sat on the floor in the dark with the lights off, listening for footsteps or voices in the hallway. All I heard was the hum of the fridge and the pipes clanking in the walls. I started to worry someone might be watching me, maybe from the stairwell or behind one of the doors down the hall. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. I tried to think of who might have a problem with me. Maybe someone I'd annoyed at work, or a neighbor who didn't like the noise from my TV. But nothing made sense. I barely talked to anyone. That night, I downloaded a sound recording app on my phone and started leaving it running while I slept, just in case I could catch something. I set the phone on the little table by the door, plugged it in so it wouldn't die. I didn't really expect to get anything, but it was better than just lying awake and waiting. The first night, the recording was just building sounds. Pipes banging, elevator rumbling, the faint noise of someone coughing 2 floors up. Nothing out of the ordinary. I almost forgot about it until I played the second night's recording. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, steady, heavy enough to echo a little. They paused in front of my door, just for a few seconds. Then nothing. No knock, no voice. Just the sound of someone standing there, and then walking away. I replayed that part a few times, volume turned up all the way. I couldn't tell if the person stopped to listen, or if they left something. But the footsteps made it clear someone was out there at that hour. My building wasn't the kind of place where people stayed up late, especially on a weeknight. I was getting creeped out, but I didn't want to call the police over some garbage. It felt stupid, like I'd be wasting their time. I thought about telling the landlord, but he never answered the phone and only came around once a month to collect rent. I decided to wait and see if I could catch the person in the act. Maybe if I saw who it was, I'd be able to talk to them or figure out what they wanted. So I started going to bed earlier, shutting off my lights by 10, keeping my phone charged and ready in case something happened. Every night, I checked the app, making sure it was recording before I went to sleep. I kept the curtains closed and pushed a chair against the door just to feel safer, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, I woke up to another pile of carefully arranged junk right on my doormat. On Saturday morning at 4 a.m., I woke up to quiet tapping on my bedroom window. I'd left it cracked for air, and my apartment was on the first floor, so someone could easily reach the window from outside. At first, I thought it was a tree branch, or maybe a bird, but the tapping kept going, steady and slow. I lay in bed, listening, my heart beating faster. Then I got up, walked carefully to the window, and looked through a gap in the curtains. There was a teenager standing outside, maybe 16 or 17, wearing a gray hoodie pulled up over his head. He had one hand in his pocket, and he was tapping on the glass with the other, using just his finger. When he saw me looking back at him, he stopped right away. We both froze for a second, staring at each other through the window. The kid looked just as surprised as I was. His face was pale, dark hair hanging over his eyes. He didn't look threatening, just awkward, and maybe a little embarrassed. He stepped away from the window, looking around like he wasn't sure if he should run. I flipped on my bedroom light and kept the curtain only slightly open. "What are you doing?" I said, loud enough for him to hear. "I'm going to call someone if you don't leave." I didn't have my phone in hand, but I tried to sound confident. He shook his head and put his hands up to show he wasn't dangerous. "Sorry, I'm sorry," he said through the glass, his voice quiet and a little shaky. "I thought my girlfriend lived here. I didn't mean to freak you out. Is Jessica here?" He kept his eyes on the ground, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I looked at him for a moment, trying to decide if he was telling the truth. His voice didn't sound aggressive, just confused. I stayed by the window, not opening it all the way, and kept watching him to make sure he didn't try anything. He took another step back. "She lives here, right? Or she did. I just wanted to talk to her. I left some stuff by the door, like old jokes, stuff she'd know was from me." He sounded nervous, mumbling, and his shoulders were hunched. "No one named Jessica lives here," I said, still keeping my voice firm. "This is my place. I moved in at the start of May." I watched him carefully, ready to close the window and call for help if he did anything weird. The kid just stood there, hands in his pockets, biting his lip. "She lived here before, like last semester. She stopped talking to me after this fight we had. I thought she was ignoring me, but I wanted to say sorry. I tried texting, but she blocked me. I didn't know what else to do, so I came by a couple times, late, just hoping she'd see it." I asked, "When was the last time you actually talked to her?" He shrugged, glancing away. "Over a month ago, maybe longer. I haven't seen her since. Her number's not working, and she blocked me on everything. I just figured she was avoiding me. Her stuff was gone when I checked out here the first time, but I didn't know if she just moved her things to someone else's place or what. I thought she'd show up if I left stuff outside." It was still dark outside, the streetlights shining on the sidewalk, making his face look even paler. I could see his hands shaking a little. I told him again, slower this time, that there was no Jessica here. "I've never met her. I've lived here since May. I don't know who lived here before, but it wasn't me." "Maybe you should try finding her another way, not by coming here." The kid looked embarrassed now, rubbing the back of his neck and staring at the ground. "Sorry," he said. "I really didn't mean to scare you or anything. I just wanted to say sorry to her, that's all. I thought she'd at least tell me to leave her alone if she saw the stuff." I stayed by the window, watching him closely. "Look, if you really want to get in touch with her, maybe ask one of her friends. You can't just come around someone's place like this, especially in the middle of the night." He nodded, eyes on the sidewalk. Yeah, you're right. I didn't know what else to do. I won't come back, promise. Sorry again. He turned and started to walk away, moving quickly toward the street. I waited by the window until he was gone, watching him pass under the streetlights and disappear around the corner. After he left, I stood there for a while, making sure he was really gone. The street was empty, just the sound of a distant car and the hum of the streetlights. I double-checked the locks on my window and front door, then sat on my bed, listening for any other noise. The apartment felt quieter than usual, every sound standing out in the dark. The next morning, there was nothing outside my door. No trash, no weird objects, just a clean doormat and the usual faint smell of mildew in the hallway. I looked out the window, but the street was empty. For the first time in weeks, I felt like things were back to normal, but I kept thinking about how easy it was for someone to end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. I never saw the kid again. The hallway stayed clean, no more footsteps on the recordings, no more late-night tapping. Sometimes when I left for work in the morning, I'd look down the street just in case, but there was never anyone there. It was just me, my apartment, and the quiet building. It made me realize how quickly something ordinary could turn into something unsettling. How someone desperate to fix a mistake could end up creeping out a stranger instead. The whole thing could have been worse, but it was just a kid looking for someone who'd already moved on, stuck outside a window in the middle of the night with nobody left to answer. When I was in my second year of med school, I had this anxiety that made studying in the dorm feel impossible. My roommate always had music playing, people coming and going, loud conversations late at night. No matter how many times I asked him to keep it down, it never lasted more than a day or two. It got to the point where I just couldn't focus, and my grades were slipping. So, I started driving out to this national park about an hour away. It wasn't one of those super popular places, not a tourist destination, just miles of forest and hills, a few old trails, some picnic tables by the main parking lot. The first time I tried it, I just sat at a picnic table, opened my textbooks, and realized how quiet it was. I could actually hear myself think. There were birds, the sound of wind in the trees, but nothing else. After that, I started going every other weekend, sometimes during the week if my class schedule let me. I never stayed more than 3 or 4 hours, just enough to read a couple chapters or make flashcards before heading back to the chaos of the dorm. I liked that there were no distractions, no phone reception, no chance of running into anyone I knew. I would bring my backpack, a water bottle, a sandwich or two, and park by the same trailhead every time. I never saw anyone else out there except the odd hiker or dog walker on the main path, but they never bothered me. When my anatomy finals started coming up though, I knew I needed to really buckle down. The library was packed, the dorm was impossible, and my brain just couldn't settle at home. So, I made a plan. I'd drive out to the park early, find a quiet place off the main trail, and spend the entire day going through every system, every diagram, just grinding through it all. I didn't want to risk getting interrupted. That Saturday, I woke up before sunrise, packed my biggest textbook, some snacks, a thermos of coffee, a rain jacket in case the weather turned. I let my roommate know I'd be gone for the day. He barely looked up from his phone. I checked the map in the parking lot when I arrived, but most of the trails were already familiar to me. Still, I thought if I could get a little farther out, maybe I'd find a really quiet spot. No chance of anyone wandering by. It was cooler than I expected, and the grass was wet with dew. There was just one other car in the lot, an old green Subaru with some trail stickers on the back. I locked my own car, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started up the trail. After about half an hour, I cut off the main path onto a smaller one, almost overgrown, that wound up a low hillside. The forest there was denser, the ground spongy underfoot. I took my time, stopping every so often to listen, make sure I wasn't too close to the road. I didn't see anyone. At some point, I left the path altogether, stepping over fallen branches and wet leaves, until I found a clearing that looked like it didn't get much foot traffic. There was a flat rock, about waist height, sticking up out of the ground, just the right size for my books. Around the edge of the clearing, saplings grew close together, making it feel boxed in and hidden from view. I brushed off the top of the rock with my sleeve, set my backpack down, and started unpacking. The morning was cold, but as the sun rose, the light filtered through the leaves, and I could see steam rising off the damp moss. I opened my anatomy book, laid out my notes, and got to work. The diagrams of the nervous system looked even more complicated in the early sunlight, but it was the best focus I'd had in weeks. For the first hour, I barely looked up except to take a sip of coffee or scribble a note. There was nothing to distract me. The only sounds were the buzz of insects, the distant calling of a crow, the occasional gust of wind in the branches. It felt safe, almost like the world had shrunk to just that small circle of trees, my notes, and the stone under my hands. After about an hour, I noticed a couple birds flitting low to the ground, picking at the leaves. I took out a granola bar, chewed slowly, rereading the last few paragraphs about cranial nerves. My phone, as expected, had no signal, which I liked. There was no way for anyone to call or text. I finished my snack, tossed the wrapper back in my bag, and stretched. I still hadn't heard anyone else. No voices, no footsteps, not even a dog barking. The silence started to feel heavier, but it was good for studying. I got back to the diagrams, tracing the pathways with my pen, repeating each part out loud. Sometime after that, when the sun was getting higher, I heard a branch snap in the woods behind me. It wasn't close, but it was sharp and sudden, not like the noises I'd been hearing before. I stopped reading, listening hard. For a few seconds, nothing happened. I thought maybe it was a deer or an elk. Sometimes they wandered through the forest and I'd seen their tracks before. I went back to my book, trying to shake off the feeling. Then there was another sound, softer, like leaves being brushed aside. I realized I was gripping my pen too hard. I set it down, got up from the rock, and clapped my hands a few times, calling out, "Hey, get out of here!" hoping that if it was an animal, the noise would scare it off. The sound stopped. For a while, there was only the wind and some birds again, like nothing had happened. I waited, standing with my back to the rock, scanning the trees. I couldn't see anything moving, no antlers, no brown fur, nothing. I sat back down and tried to focus again, but I was more alert now, glancing up at every little noise. My brain kept going back to that snapping branch, how sudden it had been. I started thinking maybe I should have chosen a spot closer to the trail, but it felt silly to pack up and move just because of a deer. After a few more minutes, I saw movement through the trees on the far side of the clearing. At first, I thought it was just the wind or another animal, but then I noticed the shape was all wrong. It was tall, taller than any animal that lived around here, and moved too smoothly, like it was being careful not to make noise. I held my breath, trying not to make any sound. Through the shadows, between the trunks, I realized I was looking at a person, just standing there, half hidden, watching me. The guy was wearing full camouflage gear and had a paintball mask covering his face. He was just standing there, barely moving, maybe 30 seconds or longer, just staring straight at me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was watching me the whole time. The way he stood so still, it didn't look like he was out for a hike or anything normal. There weren't any paintball fields in the park, and it wasn't hunting season. No one was supposed to have a gun or anything like that out here. But he had gloves, boots, even a pack on his back, like he was planning to stay a while. I tried to act like I wasn't bothered, shoving my notebook and the big anatomy textbook into my backpack, but my hands were shaking and my fingers kept slipping. He started walking straight at me, slow but steady, making this humming sound in his throat that got louder the closer he got. Not singing, not talking, just this weird droning noise, like he was in his own world. I didn't know what to say. My mind went blank. I tried to ask him, "Hey, are you okay?" But the words came out weak. He didn't answer, just kept getting closer, the mask reflecting the trees behind me. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my whole body. I started pulling the rest of my things together, dropping my pen and not even bothering to pick it up. He was almost in the clearing now, maybe 20 feet away, and that sound he was making started to break up into quick little chants, like he was reciting something under his breath. None of it made sense, just syllables strung together, sometimes repeating, sometimes getting louder. I stopped packing and just stared at him, frozen for a second, thinking if I made any sudden move he might run at me. Then he did exactly that. He broke into a run, arms waving over his head, shouting random words at the top of his lungs. Not real sentences, just bits and pieces. Alpha, 0, down, down. And then more laughing, high-pitched and sharp. He was running straight at me, and I really thought he was going to hit me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, and fell hard on my side. My bag almost slid out of my hands. But instead of attacking, he stopped just a few feet away from where I'd fallen and started laughing in this horrible, broken way, like he couldn't catch his breath. The laughter kept rising and falling, mixed with gasps and coughs. Then he started swaying from side to side, crouching and standing up, his whole body jerking like he couldn't control his muscles. He kept mumbling and laughing, then would get real quiet for a few seconds, just staring at me through that mask. I pushed myself up off the ground, backpack hanging off one shoulder, and tried to talk to him again, but he didn't seem to hear me. He just kept shifting from foot to foot, sometimes clapping his hands, sometimes shaking his head violently. There was something really wrong with the way he moved, like he was strung out or sick or both. I looked around, trying to judge how fast I could get to the trail without having to run right past him. My legs were shaking, but I started to edge around the edge of the clearing, not taking my eyes off him. He let me, just watched me circle away, and then started humming again, rocking in place. When I got to the far side, I bolted. I didn't run at first, just walked as fast as I could without looking desperate. But as soon as I hit the tree line and couldn't see him anymore, I started sprinting. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the brush, still laughing and yelling. His footsteps were heavy, not far behind at first, and I could hear sticks breaking under his boots, that humming turning back into shouts. I didn't look back, just kept running down the path, barely dodging low branches and roots. I was so out of breath my chest hurt, but I couldn't slow down. I finally reached the main trail and kept running until I saw the first signpost, the one pointing back to the parking lot. I could still hear him crashing around in the woods somewhere behind me, but it sounded farther away. My shoes were soaked from the morning dew, and my legs were burning, but I forced myself to keep moving, only stopping to catch my breath once the parking lot came into sight. There were a couple cars parked, but no people, just empty spaces and the early afternoon sun glaring off the windshields. I fumbled with my keys for what felt like forever, looking over my shoulder again and again, half expecting to see the guy burst out of the woods at any second. I finally got the car door open, tossed my bag inside, and locked the doors before I'd even sat down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition. For a few seconds, I just sat there, catching my breath, listening for any sound outside. But it was quiet. No footsteps, no yelling, just the normal hum of the park. I backed out fast, tires crunching on the gravel, and sped straight to the ranger station at the entrance. Inside, I told them everything. What the guy was wearing, what he did, the sounds he made, the spot where it happened. They asked me to fill out a report, then called in another ranger from the back office. They both seemed worried, not surprised, just tense. One of them told me they'd had a couple complaints about campers in the last few weeks, but nothing violent until now. They said they'd increase patrols, check that part of the park, and told me to call if I remembered any other details. A week later, I got a call from the same ranger. They'd found a makeshift campsite not far from the clearing where I'd been. There were empty pill bottles, torn food wrappers, a bunch of old camping gear, and some weird drawings scratched into the dirt. They never found the guy. I guess he moved on, or maybe just hid somewhere else in the park. The ranger thanked me for coming forward, said they'd keep looking, but that was pretty much it. I never went back to that park after that. I tried to study at the library, even at coffee shops, but I never felt as safe as I did before. Sometimes I still think about that guy, the way he watched me, the way he laughed, how easily things could have gone worse if he hadn't stopped when he did. Even now, every time I hear a branch snap or someone humming, it makes my skin crawl. I still have nightmares about being stuck in those woods, hearing footsteps behind me, and knowing there's nowhere to run. So when I was 20, me and my two best friends Madison and Caitlin decided to rent this lake house for summer break. Madison's family owned this cute little place at Crater Lake, and she said we could use it for a week after finals. It was supposed to be a cheap getaway. We all felt wrecked from the semester. Everyone looked tired. No sleep, running on caffeine, barely making it to class half the time. So we figured it was our chance to just do nothing for once. Just the three of us, some food, swimming, and maybe a few drinks, but mostly just hanging out and catching up. I remember the drive up being quiet. We left early in the morning because Madison's dad warned about traffic near the tourist part of the lake. I sat in the back, scrolling on my phone, half listening to Madison and Caitlin argue over which playlist to use. It was all pretty normal. The road twisted a lot as we got closer to the house. At some point, we passed through this small town that looked almost empty. Just a single gas station, a grocery store with boards over one of the windows, a post office. Then, after maybe 10 minutes, you finally get to the area with cabins. The lake itself is huge and deep blue. Madison's family cabin was at the far edge. It wasn't fancy, but it had a porch and a little dock that stuck out onto the water. We spent most of that first afternoon cleaning. The place smelled a bit musty when we walked in, like old wood and closed windows. Madison opened everything up, and Caitlin found a broom and started sweeping dead bugs off the window ledges. I unpacked the groceries. We didn't bring much: pasta, bread, cheese, some snacks, a bag of apples. Madison found a half-used bottle of sunscreen and tossed it in the trash. That evening, we walked down to the water. The air felt cool and clean. Nobody else was out. The only sound was the splash from ducks swimming near the reeds. Caitlin dared me to jump in, but I only dipped my toes because the water was ice cold. Madison just sat on the edge of the dock, legs dangling. After a while, we heard a door slam from one of the other cabins. An older man, maybe in his 60s, started walking toward us from the house next door. He had gray hair and wore a faded fishing hat and a plaid shirt tucked into his jeans. He walked slow, waving his hand. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, said he stayed up at his place most of the year. His voice was loud and kind of gravelly. He smiled and said if we needed anything, tools, directions, anything at all, to just knock on his door. Madison thanked him and said her parents spoke about him before. He stood there a little too long, looking at all three of us, but eventually turned and went back to his cabin. Caitlin whispered, "Well, that was friendly." We watched him walk back and disappear inside. For the rest of the evening, we just played cards and made sandwiches. Nothing felt weird, not really. It was quiet and safe, which is what we all wanted. I woke up early the next morning. The sun was coming through the window. The house creaked as it warmed up. Caitlin was already in the kitchen making coffee. She was wearing Madison's hoodie, staring out the window at the water. I joined her, and she said she'd heard a boat engine last night, maybe midnight or so. But when she looked out, she didn't see anything. I just shrugged. Madison was still asleep, buried under a pile of blankets. Later, after breakfast, we went out back. Madison spread a towel on the sandy part of the little beach and lay down to sunbathe. Caitlin and I headed for the water. The lake was clearer than it looked from the house, freezing at first, but nice once you got used to it. We swam out just a little, floating and laughing about old teachers and how bad our exams had gone. Caitlin pointed out a big bird sitting on a branch over the water, and we tried to guess what kind it was. That's when Madison's voice broke in. She called out from the beach, sounding kind of bored. "Hey, look over there." She was pointing across the lake, squinting against the sun. Caitlin and I turned to see what she meant. On the far shore, maybe a quarter-mile away, there was a man standing right at the edge where the rocks met the water. He had on a windbreaker and a floppy hat, and he was holding a fishing rod, but he wasn't casting a line or looking at the water. Instead, he was staring through a pair of binoculars, and it was clear, even from where we were, that he was aiming them straight at us, not just at the lake in general, but at our little stretch of shore. Madison gave a big wave, shouting something like, "Hello!" But the guy didn't wave back. He didn't even lower the binoculars. He just kept them up, shifting them a little as we moved in the water, following our shapes. Caitlin drifted back toward me, and I could feel the mood change. She asked quietly if we should get out, but I told her he was probably just a regular fisherman. Still, neither of us turned our backs to him. We just watched as he stood completely still, not fishing, not moving, just watching us. After a few minutes, Madison sat up and asked, "Do you think he's lost or something?" I didn't answer. The whole thing was starting to feel strange. Eventually, I got out and grabbed my towel, and Caitlin followed. When I looked back across the water, the man was still there, staring, not moving, and the binoculars never lowered. We decided to get out of the water and head back to the house, but the guy stayed right where he was, still watching us. Every time he shifted, the sun caught the glass of his binoculars, sending a flash across the water. We didn't say much as we wrapped ourselves in towels and went inside. Caitlin locked the back door behind us, then closed the blinds on the big window that faced the lake. Madison kept peeking out from the corner of the curtain, giving us little updates. "He's still there," she said, her voice quieter each time. We tried to keep busy, playing a board game, checking our phones, making popcorn, but every few minutes, one of us would glance outside and see him standing in the same spot. Sometimes he would move the binoculars, and you'd catch that flicker of light again. It felt like he was waiting for something. About an hour later, when the sun was starting to get low, Madison checked and finally said, "He's gone." We all came over to look. The shoreline across the lake was empty. There was no sign of anyone, just trees and rocks. But the relief didn't really hit. Something about it felt off, like we were missing something important. We sat in the living room talking it over, debating if we should call someone. Madison said her parents always told her to call the ranger station if anything weird happened, but Caitlin said it would sound stupid to report a guy just standing there. In the end, we let it drop and turned on a movie. After dinner, we double-checked the doors and made sure the windows were locked. Madison said she wanted to sleep in the master bedroom with me, and Caitlin said she was fine in the smaller room. Before bed, we kept looking out at the lake, but everything was pitch black. It was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and nothing else. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the feeling to fade. I think I fell asleep around 1. It must have been about 3 in the morning when I woke up. The house was still dark. At first, I thought maybe I just needed to use the bathroom, but then I heard it. A slow, steady creak, the sound of someone walking on the deck outside our window. I held my breath, listening. Whoever it was, they moved carefully, trying to step lightly but not quite pulling it off. Each step made the boards groan just a little. I nudged Madison. She woke up groggy, whispering, "What's wrong?" I told her to listen. We both lay still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved from one end of the deck to the other, pausing by each window. There was a short scraping sound, like a shoe dragging over old wood. Then silence. Then, this faint clicking noise, quick and soft, almost like the sound of a camera shutter. My heart was pounding. Madison whispered, "Should we call someone?" I slid off the bed and crouched by the window, pulling the curtain aside just a crack. In the faint light from the motion sensor over the door, I saw him, the same man from the lake. He was holding up a phone, pressing it to the glass, taking pictures of the room. He moved to the next window, blocking the outdoor light with his hand so he could see inside. I watched as he pressed his face up to the glass, scanning the shadows. I ducked back, motioning to Madison. She grabbed her phone and started dialing 911. I whispered, "Get Caitlin." Madison crept into the hallway, tapping on Caitlin's door. Caitlin answered fast, already awake, her face tense. We all went back to the master bedroom, locking the door behind us. Madison talked to the dispatcher in a low, shaky voice, explaining what was happening and giving the address. We sat on the floor, backs to the wall, waiting. I flipped on every outside light I could reach from the wall switches by the bed. Suddenly, we heard fast footsteps pounding across the deck, then the crash of someone pushing through the brush. The house felt even quieter after that, like everything had gone on pause. It felt like forever before we saw headlights through the trees and heard car doors slamming shut. 2 police officers walked up with flashlights, knocking on the door and announcing themselves. Madison let them in, and they started checking around the outside of the house. They found muddy footprints on the back steps and under every window, including the one where I saw the man. There were scuff marks on the deck, and one of the flower pots near the kitchen window was knocked over, dirt spilled everywhere. The officers asked us for a description and listened to what happened. When we described the man, one of the officers nodded and said, "I think we know who that is." He explained there was a guy in the area who'd caused problems before, taking pictures of people, peeping into houses, and scaring off renters. They said they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night and told us to call if anything else happened. The next morning, an officer came by with more questions. He said they'd caught up with the man walking along a trail near the public docks. He had a camera and his phone, and on it they found pictures of our house, our windows, and other cabins along the lake. He'd been doing the same thing for weeks. They arrested him for trespassing and invasion of privacy. After that, we didn't see or hear anything else. The police drove by every evening for the rest of our stay. Madison's dad ordered new blackout curtains and some security lights for the house, and Caitlin taped a piece of cardboard over her window at night. The lake wasn't as relaxing anymore. We spent more time inside, playing games, watching movies, sticking together. Every little sound outside made us jump, but the days passed quietly. We finished out our week at the lake and packed up on schedule. Driving away, the house looked the same as when we arrived, but we didn't talk much until we got out of sight of the water. That last day, we all agreed to never come back to that cabin alone. We kept thinking about how the guy must have seen us that first day, how he chose us, how he waited and watched and tried the windows before he finally got caught. That was the worst part, knowing he'd been planning something from the beginning, and how easy it would have been for things to go even worse if we hadn't been careful. When I was 17 and playing varsity basketball, I met this girl named Emily at a school charity event. She was new, just transferred from another school, and I noticed her hanging out by the refreshment table, not talking to anyone. She looked awkward standing there, playing with a plastic cup, so I went over and asked if she wanted some snacks. She just kind of smiled and shrugged, said she wasn't really hungry. I remember the gym smelled like old floor polish and lemonade, and people kept bumping into us as we talked. She barely said anything at first, but she seemed all right, just shy. After a few minutes, I told her my name and asked what classes she had, and she said, "I'm Emily. I just moved here. I don't really know anyone." I felt bad for her, so I tried to keep the conversation going about basketball and stuff at our school, and I mentioned our games on Friday nights. She asked if she could follow me on Instagram. I said sure, figuring it was just a normal thing to do. Most people on the team had a lot of followers, and I was always posting about games, practice, whatever. At first, everything felt pretty normal. Emily started following me on Instagram that night and liked a few old pictures. She left a comment or two, nothing weird. After that, every time I posted something, like me and the team after practice, or pictures from weekends with friends, Emily would be one of the first people to like it. Not just fast, but almost every time, within a few seconds. She'd post comments like, "Nice win," or "Looks fun," and tag a bunch of emojis. But it didn't seem that strange, because a lot of people at school did that. Then, after a couple of weeks, I started to notice she never missed a post. No matter what time it was, whether it was a quick story or an old throwback, she'd like it or comment. She'd even reply to my story polls right away. At first, I thought maybe she was just trying to fit in, so I didn't think too much about it. The next couple weeks, Emily started showing up at more school things. I'd see her sitting a few rows up in the bleachers at our games, not really cheering, just sort of staring down at her phone. Once, after a game, she came up and told me, "Good job," kind of soft, like she was nervous. She kept asking about practices, about where the team hung out, but it all sounded casual. Sometimes I'd get DMs from her with random stuff, like screenshots of memes or pictures from school, but I never really replied much. I figured she was just trying to make friends. Some of the guys joked about her being my #1 fan, but I just laughed it off. Still, every post I made, she was there. If I changed my profile picture, she'd DM me to say she liked it, or she'd post it to her story and tag me with my favorite player. I didn't say anything to her about it, just kept things friendly and moved on. One weekend, I posted a group photo of me and some friends at the pizza place near school. I didn't tag anyone, but a few hours later, Emily commented, "Looks like Mario's Pizza. I love it there." Then she DM'd me to ask what I ordered, who I was with, and how late we stayed out. It caught me off guard a little. The questions started to feel more like she was checking up on me than just being friendly. She'd mention little details from my stories, like what shirt I was wearing or who I was sitting next to. I didn't know how to respond, so I mostly just kept it short, saying stuff like, "Yeah, it's good," or "just friends." Still, she'd keep the conversation going with more questions. Her comments got more intense too. She'd write things on my posts like, "You're the reason I like this school," or "Wish I could hang out with you every day." Other people from school started noticing, and a couple teammates even asked if we were dating. I laughed and said no, but it made things weird. Emily sent me a DM that just said, "I hope you don't think I'm annoying." I felt bad, so I told her it was fine. But after that, she started messaging me more often. She'd send long paragraphs about her day, what she had for lunch, how boring math class was, what music she was listening to. Sometimes she'd tell me she had a bad day and just wanted to talk. I tried to be polite, but mostly left her on read or sent a quick thumbs up. By winter break, it started to feel like Emily was always there, always watching. One night I was out with friends and posted a quick story, just a video of the basketball court after practice. I didn't tag anyone or say where I was, but 10 minutes later Emily replied, "Still at school? Be careful, it gets dark early." It made me pause, wondering if she was nearby. The next day she sent me a DM saying she liked my jacket, even though I hadn't worn it in any pictures. I started wondering how she knew these things, but figured maybe someone told her, or maybe she just guessed. After winter break, she started asking even more personal questions. If I posted a group selfie, she'd DM me about each person, asking who they were and how I knew them. If I didn't answer, she'd ask again later, or comment on another post with the same question. I stopped responding as much, hoping she'd back off. But instead, she sent me a message that was just a long wall of text, talking about how much she looked forward to my posts, how it made her day to see what I was doing. She said she felt like she knew me better than anyone else. It started to feel like too much. I tried not to post as much after that, thinking maybe she'd lose interest if I was quieter online. But whenever I did post, even something small like a picture of my shoes or a lunch tray, Emily was there, liking it within seconds and sending a DM about it. I muted her account so I wouldn't get notifications, but that just meant I missed the messages until I opened the app and saw a stack of unread DMs from her. Some of them were just pictures of her own food, her cat, or her homework, but others were more like diary entries. She'd tell me what she dreamed about, or say she hoped I had a good night and that she wished we could hang out. It got to the point where I didn't even know what to say. I tried to keep it polite, just reacting to her messages with an emoji, but she kept sending more. Then, sometime in January, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a long message, talking about how she hoped I didn't mind her reaching out, that she just really wanted to talk, and that she was sorry if she seemed weird. She signed the message, Emily, and I realized she'd gotten my phone number from somewhere. Emily started calling me in the evenings, usually after dinner, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a row. The first couple times, I ignored it and figured she'd get bored. But she kept calling, and when I didn't answer, she left these long voicemails that sometimes went on for 2 or 3 minutes. Most of the time, she was just rambling about her day or asking why I didn't want to talk to her. Sometimes she sounded upset, or almost like she was crying, saying she didn't know what she'd done wrong. After about a week of this, I blocked her number, but then she started leaving messages on Instagram again, saying things like, "Why are you shutting me out? Did I make you mad?" I stopped responding completely, thinking if I ignored her long enough, she'd move on. That was when she showed up on my street for the first time. I looked out the window one evening and saw her walking past my house, pretending to check her phone. It was totally out of the way from her neighborhood, and there's no reason for her to be anywhere near my place. My mom saw her too and asked, "Is that the girl from your team's games?" I just said yeah, trying to act like it was nothing. But it happened again a few days later. This time, she didn't just walk by. She rang the doorbell and asked my mom if I was home. My mom called me to the door, and Emily just stood there smiling, saying she was just in the area. I told her I was busy and closed the door, but my mom wanted to know what was going on. I just said she was a friend from school who was having a tough time, but she gave me a look like she knew I was hiding something. After that, Emily started spreading rumors at school. I heard from a couple of classmates that she was telling people I'd been leading her on, that we'd been dating and I'd cheated on her. She said I broke her heart and that I'd lied to her about my girlfriend. I started getting weird looks in the hallway, and my girlfriend confronted me after hearing the rumors from her friends. I explained everything and showed her the messages, but the whole thing made things tense between us. Some people actually believed Emily, or at least thought something must have happened. I tried to avoid her at school, but she started showing up outside my classes and staring at me, not saying anything. She even followed me to basketball practice a couple of times, just sitting in the bleachers and watching. Coaches asked if she was my sister or something, and I just shook my head. It kept getting worse. Emily started posting weird stuff on her own social media, song lyrics about betrayal, photos of herself crying, and once a screenshot of my Instagram profile with a broken heart emoji. When I posted a picture with my girlfriend, she left a comment about liars always getting caught, then deleted it a few hours later. She DM'd my girlfriend too, saying, "You should be careful who you trust." My girlfriend blocked her, but Emily kept making new accounts. I was getting messages from random profiles, all with no followers, saying stuff like, "You can't ignore me forever." I started feeling nervous every time my phone buzzed, always checking to see if it was her again. By March, it was getting to be too much. I stopped posting online completely and tried to avoid being anywhere she might see me. Then my birthday came up, and my parents agreed to let me have a small party at our house. Just some friends, pizza, movies, nothing crazy. I was careful not to post about it anywhere, not even in group chats that she could see. I told everyone not to mention it online. The day of the party, people started arriving around 6. We were all just hanging out in the living room, music on, when the doorbell rang. My mom answered and I heard her say, "Can I help you?" Then I saw Emily just walk right into our living room, holding a shiny gift box. She smiled at me and said, "Happy birthday." Everyone went dead silent. My friends all knew about what had been going on, and my girlfriend was sitting on the couch, staring at her. I pulled Emily aside into the hallway and told her she had to leave, that she wasn't invited, and this wasn't okay. She acted like she didn't understand, just kept saying, "But it's your birthday. I got you a present." I told her again to leave, and she suddenly grabbed my arm, digging her nails in so hard it actually hurt. She said, "We need to talk, just us. Please, you have to listen." I tried to pull away, but she held on even tighter, her face turning red and her eyes wide. I said, "Let go. You're hurting me." She started shouting, "Why are you doing this to me? Why are you lying to everyone?" I finally pried her fingers off my arm, and as soon as I did, she lost her balance and fell backward. Emily landed hard and hit the side of her head on the coffee table. She immediately started crying, loud and dramatic, screaming that I'd pushed her on purpose. My dad came rushing in and saw her on the floor, holding her head, sobbing and shouting, "He pushed me, he hurt me." My friends were all just standing there, some with their phones out, some looking away. My dad told her she needed to leave right now, but she wouldn't get up. She kept saying, "I belong here. We're supposed to be together. He loves me. I know he does." My mom was trying to calm her down, but Emily just cried harder. We ended up having to call both the police and Emily's parents. While we waited, Emily just sat on the couch crying, refusing to talk to anyone except me, staring at my girlfriend and my parents with pure hate in her eyes. My friends didn't know what to do. Some of them left early. Others just sat quietly, awkwardly watching the whole thing. When her parents showed up, they looked mortified, like they'd been through something like this before. Her mom kept apologizing, saying Emily was going through a rough time and was getting help, but it was obvious they were just as freaked out as we were. The police ended up taking a report, but didn't arrest anyone. Emily's parents took her home, but before she left, she turned and glared at me, saying, "You'll regret this." The next week, the school called my parents and asked us to come in for a meeting. The administrators had heard about what happened at the party and all the rumors going around. They said Emily would be transferring to another school and getting counseling. It turned out she'd done the same thing to another guy at her old school before she moved to ours. The whole thing made me realize how quickly a situation can spiral out of control, and that just being polite or trying to ignore someone isn't always enough. I wish I'd trusted my instincts sooner, instead of just hoping it would stop on its own. Now, I'm way more careful about who I let into my life, and I always pay attention when something feels off, no matter how harmless it seems at first. When I was 25, I worked as a reporter for a local newspaper in Boston. I mostly covered boring city events or local politics, and it meant a lot of late nights at the office. Our newsroom was in one of those old historic brick buildings, with these thick wooden doors that rattled every time the subway ran underneath. There was a coffee shop 2 blocks down that stayed open late, and sometimes I'd head there for a sandwich when I was behind on a deadline. Most nights, I took an Uber home, but that October, my phone had been glitchy, so I started walking more often. My apartment was only about 10 blocks from the office, across the older part of town with all the fancy brownstones and iron fences. I always thought it looked nice during the day, with the trees turning orange and red, but at night it was just dark and empty. That night, it was pouring rain. I could see the water coming down in sheets from the newsroom windows, the whole city looking blurred and smeared under the streetlights. I waited around, hoping the rain would let up, but by midnight I just wanted to get home. My phone was already at 4% and my Uber app kept crashing. I figured I'd just walk. It was cold, but I had my jacket and an umbrella, and the sidewalks were supposed to be cleared for fall. I texted my editor about a story update while I packed up my laptop, then ducked out, holding my umbrella tight so it wouldn't flip inside out. The streets in that part of Boston were cobblestone, looked great in photos, but honestly, they were hell to walk on in the rain. I had my work bag over one shoulder and my phone in my hand, squinting at the screen, trying to finish my text. My shoes were already soaked after a block. The wind was blowing the rain sideways, so the umbrella barely helped. The city was quiet, hardly any cars out, just the occasional headlights passing fast. My phone buzzed with another message from my editor, and I was typing a reply, not even watching where I was going. I was near the corner where the bakery used to be when I stepped on one of the slick stones. My foot went out from under me, and I slammed down hard. My ankle twisted beneath me, and I heard myself yell. My phone shot out of my hand, skidding on the wet stones and hitting the curb. I felt pain shoot up my leg, sharp and instant, and when I tried to pull my foot up, the pain got even worse. I just sat there for a second, rain coming down on my face, my umbrella in the gutter, everything stinging and cold. My work bag was half open, papers scattered, and my laptop just sitting there in the rain. I tried to move my ankle again, but it felt wrong, like something inside had snapped or slid out of place. The street was totally empty, just wet pavement and the sound of water running into the drains. My phone was in pieces, the screen shattered, still glowing but useless. I sat back against the side of the building, trying to keep my weight off my foot. I reached for my work bag, dragging it close and stuffing the loose papers inside, but I could barely focus with the pain in my leg. The rain was so heavy it was filling my shoes. I tried to stand, using the wall for support, but as soon as I put pressure on my ankle, I almost blacked out. I slid back down, breathing hard, heart thumping in my ears. It was late enough that most windows were dark, just a few lamps glowing behind curtains up above. No one walked by. I waited, hoping someone would come out for a smoke or walk their dog, but the block was dead quiet. My hair was plastered to my forehead, water running down the back of my neck. I wiped rain out of my eyes and started yelling for help, but the sound just got lost in the storm. I shouted again, my voice echoing off the brick, but there was no answer. After a while, I just sat there, getting more and more soaked, ankle swelling so much I couldn't even loosen my shoe. I pulled my jacket tighter and tried to keep my laptop dry with the edge of my bag. Time dragged. I couldn't check the time since my phone was gone, but it must have been half an hour. My teeth started to chatter. I kept listening for footsteps or a car coming by, anything. But it was just rain and the occasional rumble from the subway somewhere far beneath. I started to wonder if I could crawl back toward the newsroom, but the pain in my ankle was so sharp I didn't think I could make it more than a few feet. That's when I saw someone. At first, it was just a shadow under the streetlight, a shape moving slowly down the other side of the block. I squinted through the rain, feeling this weird relief mixed with nerves. The figure got closer, walking at a steady pace, totally unbothered by the storm. The person was wearing a long raincoat with the hood up, and as they stepped under the street lamp, I could see their face a little. A middle-aged man, pale skin, gray hair sticking out from under the hood, water running off his chin. He didn't look up right away, just kept walking slow, hands in his pockets. For a second, I wondered if he was homeless, but his clothes looked clean and decent. I shouted again, "Hey, excuse me, I'm hurt. Can you help me?" My voice came out shakier than I meant, but I was desperate. The man finally stopped, looked in my direction, and hesitated. I explained quickly, telling him I fell and couldn't get up, that I thought my ankle was broken. He kept his head tilted forward so his face was shadowed, but I could see his eyes glinting in the streetlight, sizing me up from a distance. For a second he didn't move, just stared at me. Then, after what felt like forever, he stepped off the sidewalk and started crossing the street, coming straight toward me, his boots splashing in the puddles. Instead of offering assistance, the man knelt down right next to me and started going through my jacket pockets. His face was blank and focused, like this was just business. For a second, I was too stunned to move. He pulled out my wallet and held it in one hand, flipping it open, ignoring the rain that was pouring off his coat sleeves. My work ID badge was clipped to the inside pocket, and he just took that too, not even glancing at me. When I tried to push his arm away, my body felt slow and useless sitting there on the ground, pain shooting through my ankle every time I shifted. My fingers brushed his sleeve, but he didn't react. He just kept searching, even checking my other pockets for anything valuable. He found a crumpled $20 bill and slid it into his own coat, then put the wallet in his pocket and stood up over me, water dripping from his hood. I started shouting, yelling for help as loud as I could, hoping maybe someone would hear me through the rain. The sound bounced off the empty street, but no windows lit up, no doors opened. The man just looked down at me and said, almost calmly, "Stop yelling. No one's coming." His voice was low and steady, almost bored. I kept yelling anyway, my voice going raw, but he didn't flinch. He looked around, checking the street, then stepped back, watching me like he was still thinking about what to do next. I could see my broken phone on the ground, screen still lit up but useless, rain running over the glass. The man didn't look angry or nervous, just cold, methodical, like he'd done this 100 times before. I realized he had picked me on purpose, waited until I was helpless. My jacket was soaked through, my legs shaking with cold, rain running down into my shoes, and I felt more exposed than I ever had in my life. The minutes crawled by, the rain steady, and my mind kept spinning through what I could do. If I should try to crawl, try to grab him, scream again. But every move made my ankles scream with pain. He seemed to lose interest after a minute, glancing up and down the block, then back at me. I kept my eyes on him, not wanting to give him a reason to get angrier. He walked a few steps away, still holding my wallet and ID, and stood there for a second, shoulders hunched against the rain, deciding what to do. Every second felt like an hour. I could feel my hands going numb, my teeth chattering, the city lights smudged by the downpour, and for a moment I wondered if I'd be stuck out here all night, soaked and freezing, left with nothing. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard a voice calling from down the street. I twisted around to look. There was a younger guy in a restaurant uniform, walking fast, head down, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked up when he saw us and called out, "Hey, everything okay over there?" I tried to shout for help, but my voice was hoarse. The guy in the raincoat looked back, then started walking away fast, glancing over his shoulder. The restaurant worker called out again, louder this time. "You need help?" He must have seen something was wrong, because he started jogging toward us. The robber broke into a run, turning the corner and disappearing down the side street without looking back. The worker reached me and crouched down, pulling his phone out right away. He told me his name was Marcus, that he worked at the cafe on the next block, and asked if I was hurt. I tried to answer but could barely get the words out, shivering so hard I could hardly speak. Marcus helped me gather up my bag and what was left of my phone, then gently helped me stand, supporting most of my weight as he got me under an awning of a closed shop to get out of the rain. He pulled his jacket off and draped it over my shoulders, dialing 911 with one hand while he kept his eyes on me, asking me questions to make sure I was still conscious. His voice was steady, but I could see he was nervous too, glancing up the street where the man had run off. It took about 10 minutes for the ambulance and police to show up, but Marcus stayed with me the whole time, kneeling in the puddles without complaining. The paramedics checked my ankle, then loaded me onto a stretcher. They told me it was badly sprained but not broken, and that I'd need x-rays and a boot. I barely remember the ride to the hospital, just the heat blasting in the back of the ambulance and Marcus standing under the awning, soaked to the skin, waving as the doors closed. At the emergency room, the police took my statement and asked for a description of the man. I did my best, telling them about the gray hair, the raincoat, the way he spoke. They said it matched a string of robberies in the area. Same method, same kind of victims, always when the weather was bad. A detective came by my apartment the next day to ask more questions. He said the man in the raincoat had been robbing people for months, waiting for nights when the streets were empty and people were distracted or stranded. He targeted anyone who looked like they wouldn't be able to fight back, people injured, alone, or just unlucky. He always took wallets, phones, anything with cash or an ID, but he was careful to avoid cameras and never stayed in one place too long. The police said they were working with local businesses to get security footage, and that I wasn't the first to be robbed that month. They said most people never even saw his face. A week later, they called to say they'd caught him using footage from a bakery camera and a string of reports from other victims. He had a whole setup in his apartment, drawers full of IDs, wallets, cash, even old phones. He never spent much, just kept everything stashed away like trophies. The detective told me they'd recovered my work ID and some of my cards, but not the cash. Marcus texted me after the police came to the cafe for more questions, asking how I was doing and if I needed help getting groceries while my ankle healed. I still meet up with Marcus sometimes. He jokes about being my guardian angel, always asking if I'm watching my step when it rains. After that night, I never walk home alone in bad weather, and I always let someone know where I am if I'm working late. I started carrying a flashlight and an extra phone charger, just in case. What happened stuck with me. Not just the pain or the cold or the shock, but how quickly everything can go from normal to dangerous when you're alone and not paying attention. It only takes 1 minute, one bad fall, and one person waiting for an opportunity. Now I never take safety for granted, and every time I see the rain coming down hard over the city, I remember that night, and how close it came to being much worse. So when I was 18, I had this massive fight with my parents about my grades and refusing to go to college. They wanted me to follow their plan, but I just wanted to work and figure things out myself. It was one of those stupid arguments where no one really listens, voices keep rising, and everyone is saying things they'll regret. My dad kept pacing the kitchen, getting red in the face, and my mom sat at the table, shaking her head and wiping her eyes with a napkin. They kept repeating the same lines. "You're throwing your life away. You're not thinking straight. We only want what's best for you." I tried to keep it together, but my hands were shaking and I felt like I couldn't breathe in that house. I finally snapped, yelling something about how I wasn't their puppet and didn't want their kind of life. The fight dragged on for hours, both sides repeating themselves until the words had no meaning. At one point, I just stood there with my bag half packed from earlier, listening to my dad mutter about tough love and how maybe letting me go would teach me something. I waited until my mom went upstairs. She didn't even look at me when she passed. My dad just stared out the window, jaw clenched. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, grabbed my phone charger and some cash from my sock drawer, and walked out the door without saying anything else. The air outside felt cold even though it was late spring. My hands were shaking. I didn't know where I was going at first, just that I had to get away from there. I texted Danny, my buddy from high school. He'd always talked about how chill his uncle was, and I remembered him saying there was space at his uncle's house outside town. Danny replied almost instantly, said his uncle wouldn't care, and he'd come get me in his old Honda. I stood in the parking lot of a closed convenience store with my backpack, watching cars go by for maybe 20 minutes before Danny rolled up. He had the music blasting like always, but turned it down when he saw me. We didn't say much at first, just a quick, "Hey man," and he popped the trunk for my stuff. On the drive out, Danny kept glancing at me but didn't ask too many questions. We stopped for burgers and he paid, making some dumb joke about rescuing the runaway. By the time we hit the edge of town, it was almost dark. I could see my phone lighting up with texts from my parents, but I turned it off. The roads got narrower and trees pressed in on both sides, headlights bouncing in the dark. Danny started talking about his Uncle Ray, said he was barely ever home, always out at gun shows or hunting trips, and that the house was basically ours. He kept talking it up, promising there was a pool table, a shed full of old sports gear, no curfews, no rules. I nodded along, half listening, my brain just buzzing from the fight. We turned down a gravel road that seemed to go on forever. Then finally a mailbox with peeling paint and the number 1198 came into view. The house was dark, except for a single porch light, and Danny's uncle's old pickup parked off to the side. Danny said we could just go in. His uncle didn't care if people crashed, just to keep the place clean. Inside, the house smelled like old laundry and a faint whiff of gun oil. The living room was big, with stained carpet and faded plaid couches. There was a pile of hunting magazines on the coffee table and some empty cans in the sink, but nothing gross. Danny showed me the guest room, just a small space with a single bed and a view of the yard that stretched out to a line of trees in the back. He tossed me some sheets and said to make myself at home. That first night, I lay on the unfamiliar mattress staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the house settling. The only real sounds were Danny's muffled voice down the hall and some animal moving around outside. I felt strange, like I was waiting for someone to come in and drag me back, but no one did. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight coming through faded curtains and Danny banging around in the kitchen. He handed me a mug of black coffee and said his uncle had left a note, something about, "Out till Friday, don't break anything." There were chores listed, stuff like mowing the grass, taking out the trash, and making sure the shed was locked up at night. Danny laughed, said that was pretty much it. No rules, just don't mess with his uncle's hunting gear. I tried not to think about my parents. The silence was thick, but peaceful. Danny offered me a tour of the place, showed me the garage stacked with fishing rods and old coolers, the barn out back, the big patch of weeds where he said a garden used to be. The property was huge, 5 acres at least, mostly open grass with clusters of trees and a fence at the far end. It was almost a mile to the nearest neighbor. I wandered out to the edge of the yard and stood under a wide oak tree, looking back at the house. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Ray's house sat on 5 acres with no close neighbors. The guy was always traveling for work, attending gun shows and sporting events across the state. Danny never talked much about what exactly his uncle did, just said he sold hunting equipment and made decent money. There was a mudroom full of old boots, a locked gun cabinet in the hallway, and a big metal safe tucked in a closet off the living room. I noticed Ray had trail cameras set up on the trees by the driveway, but Danny said not to worry. His uncle just liked to keep an eye on the place when he was gone. After a couple days, I went into town with Danny to look for a job. The hardware store was hiring, and I got on part-time, stocking shelves, helping customers load bags of mulch, sweeping up at closing. The pay wasn't much, but it was my own money. I'd come home sweaty and tired, shoes caked with red dirt, but I didn't mind. At night, Danny and I would sit on the back porch with sodas, watching the sky turn orange, talking about nothing important. Sometimes Ray called to check in, but he never stayed on the line long. Just, "Everything good?" And then he'd hang up. For almost 2 months, everything felt perfect. I was earning my own money, had no parents breathing down my neck, and Danny was cool to hang with. Ray seemed fine with me being there as long as I pulled my weight. There was always something to do, cutting grass, picking up old branches after a storm, helping Danny patch a leak in the roof of the shed. Ray left envelopes of cash for groceries and gas, sometimes with a note to pick up more 30-06 rounds, or don't forget to feed the damn dog. We barely saw him, just his muddy boots in the hallway every couple weeks, sometimes a new box of duck decoys or a stack of catalogs by the TV. The quiet was nice. At night, I'd hear crickets and the wind in the trees, nothing else. If I ever thought about home, it was just a distant ache, less sharp every day. I started to feel like maybe I could actually do this. Just work, save up, stay out of trouble. I fell into a routine, and the days slipped by. One night, I sat out back after Danny had gone to bed, looking at the stars, listening to the dark settle over the empty fields. I didn't realize how much I'd needed this. Just space, quiet, and nobody watching me every second. I leaned back in the old lawn chair, listening to a coyote howl somewhere off in the woods, and let myself relax. For the first time in a long time, everything felt under control. One Thursday evening, Ray came home earlier than expected carrying this huge duffel bag. The front door banged hard, and Ray walked straight through the kitchen, not looking at anyone. His boots left clumps of mud on the tile. He glanced around, jaw tight, and said nothing to Danny or me. He dumped the bag in the hallway, then pulled his phone from his pocket and started tapping out messages fast, his thumb shaking. I could hear him muttering, come on," under his breath. Danny and I were half watching a rerun on TV but not really paying attention anymore. Ray paced back and forth, glancing at the driveway every couple minutes. He snapped the curtains shut in the living room and then turned around and told us, "Get away from the windows now. Lie flat. Don't argue." I looked at Danny. He was already sliding off the couch, face pale. I followed, pressing my cheek to the carpet, heart thumping hard. Ray started moving chairs away from the windows, pulling a big bookshelf in front of the sliding glass door. He shut off every light, making the whole house feel smaller and quieter. I heard him drag something heavy into the hall, maybe that duffel bag, and drop it behind the couch. I wanted to ask what was going on, but Ray's voice was cold when he said, "Shut up and stay down." I could see Danny trying not to cry, breathing loud and shaky. Ray kept checking through the curtains, standing in the dark, shoulders hunched. His phone kept buzzing, and every time it did, he cursed. He started muttering about being followed and bad timing, not making sense, like he was talking to himself instead of us. We stayed like that for maybe 15-20 minutes. I tried to listen for anything outside, but all I heard was Ray breathing, the fridge kicking on and off, and my own heart pounding in my ears. I thought maybe he was paranoid, or drunk, or maybe something worse, but I was too scared to move. Danny didn't say a word, just curled up tight next to the couch. Every now and then Ray would whisper, "Almost over, just keep quiet, just a little longer." About an hour later, bright headlights swung through the curtains and lit up the whole living room. 2 black SUVs rolled slow into the driveway, stopping bumper to bumper right behind Ray's old pickup. The engines didn't turn off. Ray jerked upright and cursed so loud it made me jump. He said, "Don't move," and went to the front door. I heard heavy doors slam shut outside, footsteps crunching gravel, then muffled voices, loud and sharp, echoing in the dark. I could see shadows moving past the window, figures in dark clothes with reflective vests and rifles. Suddenly, men were shouting, "Federal agents! We have a warrant! Open the door!" Ray turned the handle and pushed the door open before they could break it down. There was a loud argument right away, Ray demanding to see paperwork, yelling about jurisdiction and his rights. The agents ignored him, stepping past and spreading out through the hallway in 2 lines. One of them pushed Ray against the wall, read him something I couldn't hear, and then more agents rushed into the kitchen, the bedrooms, the back porch. They moved with purpose, voices crackling into radios. Danny and I were still on the living room floor, faces down. My back hurt, my legs were numb, but I didn't dare move. One of the agents stood over us, big guy with a flak vest, hands on his belt. "Don't move, kids. This'll be over soon." I nodded, barely breathing. The other agents stormed around the house, pulling open drawers, slamming doors, dragging out boxes. I heard someone shout, "Got it! Found more in the garage!" Someone else called for evidence bags. Danny tried to look up, but the agent barked, "Eyes on the floor." I heard Ray shouting in the hallway, swearing at someone about his rights and how they had no idea what they were doing, but his voice kept getting quieter as they pulled him further away. They made us sit up after a while, backs against the wall. I saw Ray handcuffed, face red, sweat dripping down his temple, 2 agents on either side of him. More agents carried out boxes from Ray's office, stacks of folders and envelopes, plastic bins filled with papers. Another group was in the garage, rolling out a locked toolbox and laying out what looked like gun parts and ammo on the driveway under the SUV headlights. It looked unreal, like a scene from TV, except I could smell sweat and dust and the sharp tang of gun oil. Danny was shaking, not talking. My throat hurt like I wanted to throw up. They kept us there for almost an hour while they finished searching. The agent with us tried to make small talk, asking if we wanted water, if we knew where our parents were. I just nodded, answering with short yes or no. I could see Danny staring straight ahead, not blinking. The whole house was turned inside out. Cupboards left open, mattresses flipped, drawers dumped out onto the carpet. The hallway was full of muddy boot prints and plastic gloves. Eventually, one of the agents came over and told Danny to pack a bag. He said Danny would be going with some family for now, that it was just a precaution. Danny nodded, numb, and went to his room with an agent shadowing him. The rest of the agents put the evidence into the back of their SUV, paperwork, computers, and the toolbox from the garage. Ray was led out in handcuffs, barely looking at us, just muttering something under his breath. He didn't fight anymore, just stared at the ground as they put him into the back of the car. A social worker came inside and sat next to me, asked for my parents' number. I gave it to her, hands shaking so much I almost dropped my phone. She called my mom, told her what happened, and then waited with me until my parents arrived. When my parents finally pulled up, they hugged me without saying a word, and I tried not to cry. The house looked so small and empty now. Every light on, doors wide open, strangers moving through the rooms. Danny left that night, driven off by a woman from child services. His face was blank, like he wasn't really there. I never saw him again after that. The social worker said he'd go stay with family in another state, that it was for the best. My parents put me in the car and drove home in silence. No lectures, no I told you so. Just my mom rubbing my shoulder and my dad gripping the wheel tight. At home, they let me sleep on the couch, said we'd figure things out tomorrow. In the weeks that followed, I tried to process what happened. Ray was arrested for violating federal firearms licensing laws and trafficking regulations. The newspapers printed his name, said he was part of a ring moving modified weapons across state lines. I heard bits and pieces from my parents and the news, but never got the whole story. Danny's room at Ray's place stayed empty, boxes stacked in the corners, dust gathering on the windowsill. My parents didn't force me to go back to school right away. They helped me get a job again, part-time, and talked me into taking a couple of classes at community college. It wasn't the freedom I imagined, but it was better than going back to how things were before. I saw how easy it was for things to fall apart, how fast something could go from normal to ruined. Living with Ray taught me that being on your own means facing risks you don't see coming. That sometimes the people who promise you freedom are hiding things you can't fix. I still think about that night sometimes. The duffel bag, the shouting, the way the whole world can flip in a moment. I think about Danny, wonder where he ended up. My parents never brought up the fight again. We didn't talk much about Ray either. But life moved on, quieter, a little more careful. I started over with a new plan, less sure of myself, but more aware of how fast things can change. Sometimes, being independent means knowing when to ask for help, and knowing what's waiting in the dark before you take another step. When I was 23, I shared a 2-story house in Austin with my roommate Luke. The house was a little worn down. Old hardwood floors, creaky stairs, yellowed paint on the walls that never quite looked clean even after we scrubbed it. Still, it was big and cheap enough, which made it perfect for 2 guys just out of college. Luke worked at a bar near campus and was usually home most nights, always leaving his boots by the door and his empty energy drink cans on the coffee table. He was messy, but I got used to it. That weekend, though, he was going to Dallas to visit his parents, which meant I'd have the place to myself for the first time since we'd moved in together. I didn't think much of it. I'm a programmer. My work is remote, and my schedule is weird, so staying up late alone was normal for me. My plan for the weekend was pretty basic. Order takeout, work on a web app for a local bike shop, and spend the rest of the night gaming. On Friday, after Luke left, the house felt different. Not in a spooky way, just off. It was quieter than usual. No footsteps overhead, no sound of the microwave beeping from the kitchen, no laughter from his room when he watched those dumb prank videos. There was just the soft whirring of my PC and the low hum from the fridge that needed to be replaced. I settled in at my desk downstairs with my headphones on and started coding, ignoring the empty space around me. Every so often, I'd hear the house creak or the pipes knock a little. It was an old place, so I brushed it off. Around midnight, I realized how quiet everything had become. Even the street outside was silent. I paused, looked out the window. Just the empty driveway, one streetlight flickering, and the shadow of the neighbor's big tree stretching across the yard. I checked my phone. Luke had texted to say he'd made it to his parents' place. I told him to enjoy the home cooking and sent a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No one else messaged me all night. By 2 a.m, my eyes hurt from staring at the code, so I opened a game and let the background music play while I lay back in my chair. I felt like I could hear every tick of the old wall clock in the kitchen. At one point, I went to the fridge to grab a soda, and the floorboards groaned under my feet. I glanced at the thermostat. It was a little colder than usual, but not enough to care. Upstairs, the doors were all closed, and the hallway was dark. I left the lights off and went back to my chair, rubbing my eyes, half listening to the sounds of my character running around on screen. By Saturday afternoon, I was still alone. I left the house just once to pick up some groceries and stopped by the coffee shop for a sandwich. When I got back, nothing looked out of place, except for a few dishes Luke must have forgotten to clean before he left. I finished some laundry and then got back to work. That night, I made instant noodles and sat at my desk again. Around 10 p.m., I thought I heard a thump upstairs, but it was faint. Maybe a book falling, or just the wind. I turned up the volume on my headphones and kept working. The house always had some noises at night, AC kicking on, the water heater, sometimes the roof settling. I told myself that's all it was, just the normal groans of an old building. It was only when I got up to use the bathroom that I realized how uneasy I felt, but I ignored it. I closed all the downstairs blinds, double-checked the front door lock, and told myself I'd sleep in late the next morning. Around midnight on Saturday, I was sitting at my desk with my laptop open, still tweaking some code, when I heard soft footsteps coming from upstairs. They were quiet, but clear enough to make me freeze. It wasn't the wind this time. It wasn't the house creaking either. The footsteps were slow and steady, moving across the ceiling above me, right where Luke's bedroom was. I sat there listening, hardly breathing, the cursor blinking on the screen in front of me. I thought maybe it was a neighbor or a cat on the roof, but the steps were too deliberate, moving from one side of the room to the other and then stopping. I muted my laptop and waited, eyes on the ceiling, hearing nothing for a long minute. Then, after a few moments of silence, the footsteps started again. This time a little faster, like someone was crossing the room on purpose. My first thought was that maybe Luke had come home early, but I hadn't heard the front door open. Besides, he always texted when he was coming back. I checked my phone. Nothing. The footsteps stopped again, and I waited, feeling the hair on my arms stand up. There was no TV on upstairs, no sound of drawers opening or anything else. Just that strange, measured walking back and forth. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer, It was small, but bright enough to see in the dark corners. My hands felt clammy as I flicked it on and started toward the stairs. The old wood creaked with every step. At the foot of the staircase, I listened again. Total silence now. The air felt heavy, like the whole house was waiting. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe the heat from the day making the wood shift. But I kept the flashlight in front of me as I slowly climbed up, one step at a time, watching the shadows change along the walls. When I reached the top, I paused, shining the light down the hallway, listening for any movement from Luke's room. Luke's bedroom door was cracked open about 6 inches. I noticed it right away as I reached the top of the stairs, and it put me on edge because I knew for a fact Luke always closed his door completely before leaving town. He was kind of obsessive about it, said he hated the idea of dust getting into his room. The hall was still and quiet. I nudged the door open with my foot, holding the flashlight up as I reached for the overhead light switch. The light snapped on, flooding the small, neatly organized room. Everything looked the same as usual. Luke's bed was made, sheets pulled tight, pillows stacked in a lopsided way like he always left them. His desk was clear except for his mouse pad and a few coins. His chair was tucked in, a hoodie thrown over the back. But then I saw his window. It was open, maybe 3 inches, letting in a thin draft. That window faced the side yard and was kind of tricky to reach from the ground. The screen was pushed out a bit on one corner. I walked over and tested it. The lock was still engaged, but the latch could be jostled loose if you wiggled it hard enough. I stared at the window for a second. I was almost certain Luke never left it open when he went anywhere, not even for a quick errand, let alone a weekend away. I checked the closet, just his shoes and extra jackets, nothing odd. Under the bed, just storage boxes and a backpack. I looked behind the curtains, peeking at the window frame and sill for dirt or marks. Nothing obvious. The room didn't smell like anyone had been inside, but it was cooler than the hallway. I stood in the center of the room for a minute, listening hard, but all I could hear was my own breathing and the distant rumble of someone's car on a nearby street. I walked back out and closed the door behind me, then moved down the hall, checking the other bedroom, the bathroom, everywhere. Nothing felt wrong, but I couldn't get that window out of my mind. I went back downstairs, locked the front door again, and just sat on the couch for a while, thinking it through. Maybe the window had been like that for days, and I just never noticed. But it didn't add up. I spent the next hour moving through the house room by room, checking every closet, looking under furniture, shining my flashlight into corners where the overhead bulbs left shadows. I even pulled down the attic ladder in the upstairs hallway and climbed up to look inside. There was nothing but dust in the boxes we'd put up there months ago, Christmas lights, some old books, and a broken fan. I looked for signs of anyone hiding or sleeping up there, but it was empty and freezing. The attic access door closed tight behind me with a hollow thump. The main doors were both locked from the inside. I checked the deadbolts and the little chain locks, pressing on them to make sure they hadn't been forced or tampered with. All the windows downstairs were shut and latched. There weren't any muddy footprints, nothing out of place in the living room or kitchen. I called Luke, my hands still a little shaky. He answered, voice groggy from being half asleep. I asked, "Did you leave your window open when you left? Or did you go back after you first left?" He sounded confused and said no. He'd checked all the windows and locked them before heading out. I could hear him getting annoyed at the questions, but I needed to be sure. "Are you sure? Because it's open now. Not a lot, just a crack." He paused, then said, "Man, I double-checked everything. Maybe it got stuck and popped open, but I didn't leave it like that." After hanging up, I went back through the house one more time, feeling more jumpy than before. The silence felt heavier, like the whole place was pressing in on me. I dragged the kitchen chairs up to wedge them under the front and back door handles, thinking it was stupid but doing it anyway. I rigged up some makeshift alarms using 2 pots balanced on a door handle and a metal spoon between them. I stacked a couple of empty soda cans on top of the window latch in the living room. I figured if anything moved, I'd hear it. The rest of the night, every sound made me flinch. The pipes banging, a car driving by, even the house shifting as the air outside cooled. I barely slept, just sat in my desk chair in the corner of my room, the flashlight on my lap and my phone in my hand. The next morning, I went outside early, circling the house and peering into the flower beds and patches of dry grass. I was looking for footprints, or maybe any sign that someone had come in from outside. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. No bent branches, no marks under Luke's window, nothing disturbed on the side fence. It was all normal, if a little overgrown from rain the week before. Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor, was out in her garden. She was already watering her flowers, as usual, wearing a faded sun hat and her big sunglasses. She saw me poking around and called out, "You lose something?" I walked over, feeling kind of stupid, and told her I was just checking because I'd heard noises the night before. She leaned on her rake, thinking for a second, then said, "Oh, maybe it's that teenager again. I've seen a boy climbing around on the roofs over the last few weeks. Real skinny, always in black sweatpants, jumping from house to house like he's in the Olympics or something." I stared at her for a second, trying to picture it. She kept talking. "He's been up on the Nelson's garage and the old Miller place too. I told myself I'd call someone about it but just haven't gotten around to it." She shrugged and turned back to her flowers, as if teenagers on roofs were a normal part of the neighborhood. I went inside and called the property management company, told them everything, and asked them to do something about it. They sounded annoyed but promised to increase security patrols in the area. I didn't hear those footsteps again after that night, but I still installed a little camera above the front door and another one on the fence by the side yard. Luke laughed when I told him about it, but he said he was glad I checked everything. I still triple-check the doors and windows every night before bed, even when both of us are home. Sometimes the answer to something weird is just some kid being reckless. But I learned you can't assume the best. Living alone, you can never be too careful.